Okay then, Torah portion, Emor. In this Torah portion, I'm going to deal in the first part, I'm going to look at pretty much all of the Torah portion. I'm going to look at Leviticus 21, 22, and 24, because they're all kind of quite similar. And then in the middle of them, we've got Leviticus 23, and that's all about the feasts. And I know it's really important that people, as they've come to follow the Torah, there's so many people that just don't know what to actually do on each feast, and the feasts are new to them. So I want to look at that in the third part. I want to look at that. And there's stuff in there as well for us that we'll benefit from. We've been doing the feasts for a number of years now, and we know them. So I'm trying to hit the two levels there with the feasts. So there'll be some interesting stuff in that. But in the second part, I want to look at the calendar. If I'm going to look at the feasts in the third part, I'm going to look at the calendar before I do, so that it makes a bit more sense when you're saying things like, on the 15th day of the Chodesh, and, what's a Chodesh? And people had a lot of questions after the last video. It seemed to be well received, but people had questions about it, and they're all really, really good questions that I've had as well. So I want to answer those questions and just kind of make it a bit clearer, a bit more precise. What are you actually doing with the calendar? How do you know when it's the new Chodesh? If you're looking at the sky, how do you know? Various other things like that. People have asked, why is it that the equinox is after the beginning of the first Chodesh? Because on the lunar calendar, they'll have the equinox, and then they'll start the next Chodesh on the next new moon. And we're using the stars, so why haven't we done that? I'm going to examine all of those things. And at the end of the second part, for people who are online, during the second part, Ashley is going to activate the live chat just before the end of it. So if people refresh their browsers at that point, they'll be able to access the live chat and ask questions, because I can't really hope to have answered all of the questions that people have got. And maybe people have got ones that they haven't expressed. So if people type the questions, Ashley's going to shout them out from the back, and I'll do my best to answer them. So this first part, 21, 22, and 24. But as we're going through this, hopefully now as we've been through the book of Leviticus, we've learned a lot about what's actually going on in the temple service. Why do we have to have the temple service? Why is animal sacrifice necessary? Atonement, what's atonement about? And we've seen Yehovah from a different perspective, that he is dwelling in that tabernacle. And in order to be able to dwell there, certain things have to be done to make it somewhere he can dwell. And the closest, when I've been thinking about it, that I can really think of as an analogy is, it's a bit like, if you've got a clean room, say you've got a room that you need to keep in a vacuum, and you can't have anything in there, you can't have any particles of anything, because it'll ruin whatever you're doing. You're working on something, it needs to be a completely clean environment. For us to go into that environment, we would need to prepare ourselves. Maybe we'd need to wear an oxygen mask, or whatever we'd need to be able to go and dwell in an environment in which there was a complete cleanness, complete lack of anything, even oxygen. Even oxygen is of the world. And that's kind of what the tabernacle's like, with them putting on the holy garments to go in and to serve there. And then you've got the Holy of Holies, which is where his actual presence is, and you've got to be prepared to enter in there. And we saw that on the Day of Atonement, even in that clean environment, completely clean, atonement had to be made for the place where he appeared. I don't know, it's kind of like if you had to change the filters on the vacuum pumps to make it a vacuum environment. Okay, you need to maintain it, because it exists in a world which is fallen. And this is the problem. We're going to see a little bit more of this through these instructions. The world has become corruptible. Death has entered into the creation. Yehovah is set apart from that. And if he's going to dwell near it, preparations need to be made. And as I've been thinking about this, you can just read in scripture, you can just read over things. You read over and Yehovah said to Moshe. Okay, so Yehovah said to Moshe. I've been thinking about Moshe. When Yehovah said to Moshe, where was Moshe? Where was he when he was speaking with the Lord? Okay, at one point he was on top of a mountain, but where is he now when he goes and speaks to him? Okay, as it turns out, Numbers 7:89 says, when Moshe went into the tent of meeting to speak with him, so he's going into the tabernacle to speak with Yehovah, he heard the voice of one speaking to him from above the place of atonement, from above the kaporet. You see in Leviticus 16:2, Yehovah said to Moshe, speak to Aharon your brother not to come in at all times to the Kodesh place inside the veil, in the presence of the kaporet which is on the ark, lest he dies, because I appear in the cloud above the place of atonement. So just like we see Moshe doing the duties of the priests before the priests, we're prepared to do it. Moshe was actually able to enter into the Holy of Holies, and he was able to speak with Yehovah there. And we know that in order for people to be able to do that, they've got to be prepared in a very particular way. So Moshe must have kept himself holy. He must have been doing this. There's something about Moshe that we're not fully engaging with. Numbers 12:6-8 says, and he said, hear now my words, if your prophet is of Yehovah, I make myself known to him in a vision, and I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moshe, he's trustworthy in all my house. I speak with him mouth to mouth and plainly and not in riddles, and he sees the form of Yehovah. So he comes in and he's speaking with Yehovah in the Holy of Holies. So he must have been keeping himself clean and keeping himself holy. So there's something very special about this guy, Moshe. That's how the Torah portion starts. Yehovah said to Moshe, speak to the priests, the sons of Aharon, and you have said to them, no one is to be made tameh. We've got the two things, tameh and tahoah. Tahoah is clean, tameh is unclean, and that's the word that's used. You're going to see the word defiled in the English a couple of times, but we've got a couple of different Hebrew words that are being translated as defiled. No one is to be made unclean for the dead among his people, except for his relatives who are nearest to him, for his mother, for his father, and his son and his daughter, for his brother, for his maiden sister, his virgin sister who is near to him, who has no husband. For her, he is made unclean. So what we're seeing here is Yehovah's compassion. Okay, and throughout the Torah portion, we're going to see the limits of Yehovah's compassion. He's compassionate and he takes things into account, but there's a certain point after which you just can't change the way things need to be. Okay, these priests need to be set apart to do their duties. These people have been given this incredible role to come close to the Creator as he dwells on the earth, and they need to be set apart. So he says, look, they can't be defiled for the dead. He said, but for these people who are really close to them, I'm going to make an allowance. I'm going to be compassionate about it. A leader, and the word there, interestingly, is a Baal, does not make himself unclean among his people to profane himself. That's why Baal, you hear people say Baal means Lord or it means master. When it's used in the human realm, it means master or Lord. To profane himself, and the word there is halal. Okay, halal himself. Not the same as making himself tameh, but sometimes you'll see halal being described as defiling yourself, because it's trying to describe a concept to you of what's happening. To halal yourself is to make yourself profane. The ordinary things of the world are profane. Remember, Yehovah is set apart. The things of the world are profane. They're not necessarily unclean. You could have a profane thing that was unclean, but there's a difference between the two, and we need to understand these differences. Yehovah actually states that it's very important for us to understand the differences between these things. They do not make any bald place on their heads. They do not shave the corner of their beard. They do not make a cutting in their flesh. They are Kodesh to their Elohim. That's the noun. We're going to hear Yehovah talk about my holy. That's a concept. It's this thing this category of things, his holy, the things that are the holy. They are holy to their Elohim and do not halal the name of their Elohim. Okay, so they're set apart and they've got this role to play, but they cannot profane the name of Yehovah. And we'll see that a couple of times throughout the Torah portion, the idea that Yehovah is set apart and these people cannot profane his name by doing things that are profane. Like if you had a businessman, his reputation was incredibly important, and he traveled around, and as he traveled around, he had this team of like elite chefs that would serve him his food. It would be very important that those chefs didn't profane his name. If every time they went out somewhere, they were going off and doing all the seedy things of the local culture, the things that the pagans did, okay, it would not reflect well on the businessman. Just as an analogy to understand it. Why? Because they draw near with the offerings made by fire of Yehovah, the asher of Yehovah, and the lachem of their Elohim. And as I've been going through this, I've been trying to think, well, what is the bread of their Elohim? In this Torah portion, we're going to learn about the showbread. And that's kind of instantly where your mind goes. Well, the bread of their Elohim is their showbread. But as it turns out, it gives us the answer, which we'll see later. The bread of their Elohim are the animal sacrifices. Lachem means food. Like in old King James language, they would say meat instead of food. Well, here the word lachem is used instead of food. So it's the bread or their food of their Elohim. So they're coming and they're making these offerings. And they shall be set apart. This is the describing word, the adjective. They're going to be holy. Ezekiel 22:26 says, her priests have done violence to my Torah, and they halal my kodesh. Okay, the word matters isn't there. It's just kind of something that the translators have put in to try and make it sound better, sound less awkward in the English. But it literally says, they profane my holy. They have not distinguished between the kodesh and the chol. The chol is the profane. It's the noun again. You've got these two categories of things. You've got the kodesh and the chol. And certain things fall into them. And we need to be very careful with how we treat the holy. Yehovah's holy. And we'll see those things. Nor have they made known the difference between tameh and the tahor. And they have hidden their eyes from my Shabbatot, and I am halaled in their midst. And we think, I know sometimes I think people think it's okay to use the Sabbath for something else. The Sabbath is one of his holy. It is his holy, and we need to be very careful how we treat it, and we are not to profane it. We should be very careful about what we're doing on the Sabbath, because we're taking something that is holy, part of his holy, and we are instead making it to be part of the whole. So we need to treat these things with the appropriate respect. He says that his priests done violence to his Torah by not making the distinction between these things. Verse 7 says, they do not take a woman who is a whore or a halaled woman, okay, someone who is profane. And they do not take a woman put away from her husband, for he is kadosh to his Elohim. So they are the kadosh, the holy. Yehovah's compassion has a line. Okay, it's like, well, you can only take women who are in this state because you are kadosh. Okay, you love that other person, but you need to remain holy. You can't take someone who's defiled. It just doesn't work. If you're going to come and you're going to serve in my tabernacle, you cannot take someone who is profane. So this is one of the boundaries that we'll see to his compassion. You have set him apart. You have kadashed him, for he draws near with the lachem of your Elohim. He is kadosh to you, for I, Yehovah, kadashing you, am kadosh. Okay, so this person has to be in this particular state to do this. They've been given this role to play. Physically here on the earth, you cannot physically enter into the tabernacle if you were to take a profaned woman. They would have to abdicate their priesthood, or whatever you'd want to call it. Verse 9 says, when the daughter of any priest halals herself by whoring, she halals her father. She is burned with fire. Okay, when someone's daughter profanes herself, she's burned with fire because she's profaned her father. This law, okay, I think Charlie mentioned something similar to this last week. This law would put more burden on the parents. Okay, the daughter, for a start, would not be profaning herself. You'd have to actually think about what you were doing and the consequences of your actions. I don't want to be burned with fire, so I'm not going to do this. But for a father as well, a father's responsibility would be increased. And we look at things like this and we can say, that's harsh, isn't it? You know, you get the critics of the Bible looking at the Bible and they pick holes in things and they look at things like this and they say, that's not good. That's not a good way for God to be. And you said the way of YHVH is not right. Hear now, O house of Israel, is my way not right? Is it not your ways that are not right? The problem isn't YHVH prescribing someone to be burned. The problem is that they've gone out and whored and profaned themselves. That's a really terrible, terrible thing. But in our society, we've got so far away from standards of morality because sin like that is happening all around us. We've forgotten just how serious it is. And so when people who do not believe in YHVH look at those things, they say, well, this is terrible. But really, these things force us to consider the nature of the actual act itself and how it stands before YHVH, how our sin actually stands before YHVH, because we cannot ascribe the appropriate seriousness to our sin. And things like this really bring into sharp focus just how important it is. And it's particularly important for the daughter of a priest because she is profaning her father as well. She's making her father profane, and then he is entering in to do service to YHVH. And the high priest among his brothers, on whose head the anointing oil was poured, and who is ordained to wear the garments, does not unbind his head nor tear his garments, nor come near any dead body, nor defile himself for his father or for his mother. Okay, so for the priests, you cannot defile yourself for the dead. Okay, I'm going to have some compassion. I'm going to allow you for father, for mother, for those who are close to you. You can defile yourself. But for the high priest, there's a boundary again to his compassion. It's so important that the high priest fulfills this role in the correct condition. He says, no, there is actually no way that this can happen. The high priest cannot do that. Okay, yes, I'm compassionate, but these things all have a boundary, after which compassion is not appropriate anymore. Nor go out of the set-apart place, nor halal the set-apart place. We're going to see that there's more than one of these set-apart places. It's the mikdash from the Hebrew to kadash, to make holy. This is a place that has been made holy. And there's the holy place, which is the tabernacle. But then there's another mikdash inside of the tabernacle, which is the Holy of Holies. They are his mikdashi, his mikdashes. For the sign of dedication of the anointing oil of his Elohim is upon him. I am YHVH. Okay, so he can't do these things. Why? Because he's been prepared in this certain way to go and encounter the creator of the universe. He cannot be defiled. It's just not appropriate after that point. Let him take a wife in her maidenhood, the high priest, a widow or one put away, or a halal woman or a whore. These he does not take, but a maiden, a virgin of his own people, he does take as a wife, and he does not halal his offspring among his people. For I am YHVH, who sets him apart. Why can the high priest not profane his offspring? Because they're the ones that are going to serve as high priest. So it doesn't matter. There could be this great romance story behind these people, and they could be deeply, deeply in love, but they're not allowed to be together for a very particular reason, because he is not to be profaned by a woman who is profane. YHVH spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aharon, saying, no man of your offspring throughout their generations who has any defect is to draw near To draw near with the lechem of his Elohim. The word for defect is ma'um, and we'll look a little bit at that. Okay, so no one who is a priest who has this defect within them. Why? Why can a priest not come and serve in the tabernacle? Well, again, it's all to do with us living in a corruptible world. These people have corruptions, genetic corruptions, or whatever it is. It's this whole thing with the cycle of life and death. Again, these people are affected by the fall. They're affected by the fact that death is a part of the creation. And so they cannot draw near to the Creator. He's not prejudiced against them. He's not prejudiced against disabled people or anything like that. Just the way that it needs to be. For any man who has a defect is not to draw near, a man blind or one lame or disfigured or deformed, a man who has a broken foot or a broken hand, or is a hunchback or a dwarf, or a man who has a defect, a tavalul in his eye, or eczema or scab, or is a eunuch. No man among the offspring of Aharon the priest who has a defect, a ma'um, is to draw near with the offerings made by fire to Yehovah, who has a ma'um. He does not draw near with the bread of his Elohim. Okay, again, why can he not do this? Because there's corruption in him, which comes from the fall. He cannot approach the Creator in that state. The reason that we see for these things that's often given is lest they die when they do these things. This is the word ma'um. Blemish, spot, defect of physical defect. All good definitions. Can also mean a moral stain. And obviously when we look at all of these things, when looking at what's happening in the earthly tabernacle, and then we see what the correlate of that is in the heavenly tabernacle with Yeshua, and the correlate of us serving as priests in the body of Mashiach. So it can mean a moral stain as well. So anybody who's hoping to serve as a priest in the body of Mashiach is not to have a blemish. Okay? As we understand these things in Leviticus, we can understand just why the whole Christian doctrine of, it's okay if you sin, or, what is the implication? Is that it's okay if you sin, even if that's not necessarily what they say. It's okay, God's going to forgive you and stuff. No, that's not how it works. Okay, if a priest became unclean on the way to the tabernacle, if he showed up at the tabernacle, he couldn't just be like, I got unclean on the way here. Well, I'm still going to do my job. I'm still going to go and minister in the holy place. I hope that's okay. No, that's not okay. You've made yourself unclean. You need to go and wash yourself. You need to have atonement made for you before you can enter this place again. And it's the same for us spiritually. 2 Samuel 24:25 says, and in all Yisrael there was no one who was praised as much as Avshalom. Father of Shalom is what Absalom's name means. For his good looks, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his feet, there was no blemish in him. So we can see how this word is used of physical defects. In Daniel 1:3-4 it says, the king said to Ashpenaz, the chief of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Yisrael, some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no ma'um, but good looking, having insight in all wisdom, having knowledge and understanding, learning, capable to stand in the king's place, and to teach them the writing and speech of the Chaldeans. So here it's kind of, which is it referring to? Is it just referring to the fact that they were good looking, there was no defect in them, or is this all to do with the ma'um as well? It does make me wonder when it says that they are good looking and there's no defect in them. And when we're raised in our new bodies, it says that we will have youthful flesh. I do wonder whether we're all going to be really good looking as well. Deuteronomy 32 verse 5 says, a twisted and crooked generation has corrupted itself. Their blemish, they are not his children. And this is interesting because this is obviously talking about moral stain. But it links the blemish with corruption again. We know this in the physical realm, the physical corruption that the priests cannot come with. Here it's linked with corruption as well. Job 11:14-15 says, if wickedness were in your hand, put it far away, and do not let perverseness dwell in your tents. These are the idioms. If wickedness were in your hand, it just means if you're doing something that is wicked. Then indeed you shall lift up your face without blemish, without ma'um. Okay, so here again it's talking in a moral sense. If wickedness were in your hand, put it far away, don't let perverseness dwell in your tents. Then indeed you shall lift up your face without blemish. That is to naso your panim, and we'll look at that when we get to Torah portion. Naso at the beginning of Numbers. You shall stand firm and not be afraid. If my step does turn from the way, or my heart has gone after my eyes, or if any ma'um has clung to my hands, again the blemishes, the moral blemishes in the things that you do. So this guy, he does eat the lechem of his Elohim. So here again we see Yehovah's compassion in these things. He weaves the right path through it of, okay, so no, this is not acceptable. This guy, he's got this corruption in his body, so he cannot enter into the holy place. But he does eat the lechem of his Elohim, even though they are the holy and they are to be treated in a certain way. He says, no, he can eat of them. Both the most set apart and the set apart, both the holy of the holy and the holy itself. He can eat of them. So Yehovah is defining very clearly the boundaries here. No, he can't enter into the tabernacle. But because he's a son of Aharon, where does his food come from? His food comes from these offerings. That is his food. Of course he can still eat of the food. Only he does not go near the veil or approach the altar, draw near to the altar. Nagash, Karav both mean draw near. Because he has a ma'um, lest he halals my set-apart places, my mikdashi. He cannot come near into the tent, and he can't come near to the veil around the Holy of Holies, lest he profanes, he makes them profane, things of this world, things that are not set apart, by coming near them in his state of corruption. For I am Yehovah who kadashes them. Thus Moshe spoke to Aharon and his sons and to all the children of Israel. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aharon and his sons that they separate themselves from the Kodesh, separate themselves from the holy of the children of Israel, and that they do not halal my Kodesh name in what they set apart to me and what they Kodesh to me. So they are to actually separate themselves from the holy things when they're not doing things to do with the holy things, so that they don't profane his name by the things that they do with the things that are holy to him. These things have to be treated in such a particular way. And this is really important for us when we consider the tithe. The tithe is holy to Yehovah. It is set apart to him. That's why it's really important not to use it for any profane matter. We have to use it for exactly what he prescribes that we use it for. We come back to the idea, because I've had feedback on the tithing teaching where people have said, but we use our tithes for doing things for poor people. Well, that's great, but it's to use it for a profane purpose. It's like if I gave you £10 and I said, go to the shop and buy me 2 steaks. And you went to the shop, and when you came back, you were like, I got you a box of chocolates. It's your favorite box of chocolates. You're going to really like it. Like, that's great. I do like those chocolates. Thank you for the chocolates. But I asked you to get me 2 steaks. What you've used my money for is for a profane purpose. We have to be very, very particular about how we use what is set apart to him. Say to them, any man of all your offspring throughout your generations who draws near the Kodesh, draws near to the holy, which the children of Israel Kadash to Yehovah, taken it of the world, they've offered it to Yehovah and they've made it Kadosh, which the children of Israel Kadash to Yehovah, while he has Tumah upon him, that soul has been cut off from my presence. I am Yehovah. So what does it mean for him to be cut off from his presence? Well, I assume that it means that he cannot be a priest anymore, To cut somebody off can mean various things. I think in some contexts it means to kill the person. I don't think this is the death sentence being handed out here, but he's cut off from his presence. He can no longer come into his presence to offer these things. If we remember why clean and unclean was important to Yehovah, he said, because he dwells in the midst of their tumah, in the midst of their uncleanness. Any man of the offspring of Aharon who is a leper or who has a discharge does not eat of the set-apart offerings until he is clean. So again, we see him laying down these boundaries here. Okay, maybe you don't eat anything today. Maybe you go and eat something else. Until you're clean. And everybody would be given the opportunity then to cleanse themselves and eat, because it was their food. Whoever touches what is rendered tameh by a corpse, or a man who has an emission of semen, or a man who touches any creeping creature by which he would be made tameh, or any soul by which he would become tameh, even any of his tumah. Okay, so again we see that Yehovah is dwelling in the midst of all of our tumah, all of these things which are profane and going on in the world that are just not in accordance with him. That we can profane him, but if we had him living in our midst. People are so quick to dismiss all of this, dismiss all the animal sacrifices, and dismiss all of the cleansings, and they read through the book of Leviticus, and I'm pretty sure that people just get to the beginning of it, and then they go, oh, still the boring stuff, oh, there you go. But it's so important that we understand what's going on. If we were to do away with the animal sacrifices, then we would never be able to dwell with the Creator. It's amazing to me that when we dwell with him, it says that there is no temple, because we have all been raised incorruptible. There is no corruption in us. And so he actually dwells with us in Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem. He dwells with us there, but we have no need of a temple, because he doesn't need to be confined in the temple. There will be a temple outside of New Jerusalem for the nations, but for us, we actually get to dwell with him. I imagine it'll be like Adam and Eve in the garden when they physically dwelt with the Creator. So we won't have a need for these sort of things, but it doesn't mean that they're not important. And it would be so much better now if we could do animal sacrifices, because we would be doing them because Yehovah's physical manifest presence would be with us on the earth, and that would be truly awesome. I wonder when people look at these sort of things, when they, people who don't believe in Yehovah, they must just think, well, these things are so crazy that they were doing. It was so crazy they were going in and they were, you've got to wash like this, and then you've got to offer this blood on this day, and it must have all seemed so crazy, but it's because they don't actually grasp that Yehovah is real, and he was right there in the temple. And if they weren't doing these things, they would have been in trouble. The soul who is touched it shall be tameh until evening, and does not eat the holy, but shall bathe his body in water. And when the sun is going, which is literally what it says, he shall be tahir. Okay, just think tahor for tahir. And afterward eat the kodesh, because it is his food. So if he becomes unclean, it is not possible for him to then come into the presence of that which has been made holy. However, it's his food. So he washes himself as the sun goes down, and then he can eat. He does not eat that which dies. Nebalah, that's the word for a corpse, or that which dies of itself, or is torn by beasts, becoming tameh by it. I am Yehovah. Okay, so for your average person, okay, they only became unclean. We saw that a couple of weeks ago. If they ate a nebalah, something that had died of itself, or something that had been attacked by animals and killed, they just became unclean if they ate of that thing. For a priest, it is sin. It's against the Torah for a priest to do it. He does not eat that which dies by itself or is torn by animals, and they shall guard my charge, lest they bear sin for it and die thereby. This is what happens with uncleanness coming into the proximity of holiness. That's why it says at the end of Leviticus 15, they need to do these things lest they die, because my tabernacle's in their midst. when they halal it, I Yehovah kadash them. And no stranger eats the holy. And this is a stranger who is a stranger by virtue of the fact that the Torah doesn't allow them to eat of the holy. The Torah says, these are the people who eat of the holy. Anybody outside of that is a zar. Translated as stranger, really, it just means someone who is unlawful. So anyone who's not prescribed by the Torah to eat of it, if they eat the holy, a sojourner with the priest, the toshav, or a hired servant, does not eat the kodesh. Okay, so they're staying with the priest. Can they eat of the food? They are not allowed. But when the priest buys a soul with his money, he does eat of it. And one who is born in his house does eat his lechem, his bread. So you could buy somebody's service for 7 years. Okay, you could buy somebody so that they came. It was usually a poor person or possibly somebody who had stolen something who was not then able to pay back what they'd stolen. Then they would come into your house and they would serve you. For a priest, okay, if they've got a guest staying with them, Yehovah says, no, they can't eat of this. You can't, not just having any randoms eating of the holy. But if you've bought somebody, you now have this responsibility to take care of this person. So they are able to eat of your food. When a priest's daughter is married to a zar, okay, not like, a foreigner or anything like that, foreign to Israel, somebody who's not allowed to eat of the set-apart offerings. In other words, somebody who's not a priest. She does not eat of the kodesh. But when a priest's daughter is a widow or put away and has no child and has returned to her father's house as in her youth, she does eat her father's lechem, but no zar eats of it. So again, you see these boundaries being drawn where he has compassion. Now, this woman has been profaned. She's been, and that doesn't necessarily carry a negative connotation. She's been profaned by the fact that she's married to somebody who is not holy. But if she comes back and she hasn't got a child to look after her, she's a widow or she's been put away, then yes, she's allowed to eat of it again. And when a man eats the holy by mistake, then he shall give a holy offering to the priest and add 1/5 to it. So someone comes along, they eat what is holy. Okay, they've taken from the holy. Forgiveness is given to them. They can replace it with another offering and they add 1/5 to it. And we saw that when we went through the guilt offering. Yehovah spoke to Moshe saying, when a soul commits a trespass and a sin by mistake against the holy of Yehovah, then he shall bring to Yehovah as his guilt offering a ram, a perfect one, not really perfect, it means complete. We're going to see it used in another context later. From the flock with your valuation and shekels of silver according to the shekel of the holy place as a guilt offering, is an asham. He shall make good for the sin that he has done against that which is holy, and shall add 1/5 to it and give it to the priest, and the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering. So this happens, he needs to be made clean as regards to his sin. Let the priests not profane the holy of the children of Israel, which they lift up to Yehovah, or allow them to bear the crookedness or the iniquity of trespass, actually guilt, when they eat their set apart, for I am Yehovah who kadashes them. So the priest's role is to stand in the way of these things happening. They were to, if somebody accidentally ate of the holy, they weren't to allow them to bear the iniquity of their guilt. Okay, they had to do this. They had to take a holy offering and add 1/5 to it. And that holy offering, as we saw in Numbers 5, Leviticus 5, was to make atonement for that person. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe saying, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the children of Israel and say to them, any man of the house of Israel or of the strangers, the ger in Israel, the people who are dwelling there like citizens but aren't actually citizens of Israel, who draws near with his means of drawing near for any of his vows or for any of his voluntary offerings, which they draw near to Yehovah as an olah. Okay, so the olah, we generally think of the olah as something which is a mandatory offering. But as it actually turns out, none of the offerings are just mandatory or just free will offerings. With all of the offerings, actually apart from the sin and the guilt offering, you can have voluntary ones, and you can have mandatory ones. So a burnt offering could be offered as a voluntary offering. We see that throughout the Torah. Of your will, or for your acceptance, it's sometimes translated, a male, a complete one from the cattle, from the sheep, or from the goats. And we're going to see why it's important for these actual offerings that are brought to be in a certain state as well. You've got to bring a complete one. In other words, one that does not have any corruption in it. Whatever has a ma'um, you do not draw near with, for it is not acceptable for you. So when you bring an offering, it cannot have a defect in as well. If it's a burnt offering, and if it's for a vow or for a voluntary offering, okay, it cannot have a ma'um. Malachi 1:6-14 discusses Yehovah's thoughts on this, basically. It says, a son esteems his father, and a servant his master. And if I am the father, where is my esteem? And if I am a master and adon, where is my fear? Said Yehovah Zevaot. You priests who despise my name, lightly esteem my name. But you asked, in what way have we lightly esteemed your name? You are drawing near with polluted food. Okay, ga'al means polluted. Defiled would be a good word for it. Lachem on my altar. But you asked, in what way have we polluted you? Because you said the table of Yehovah is despicable. And when you draw near with the blind as a sacrifice, is it not evil? So we've got this idea as well of Yehovah being holy. We don't want anything to profane him. We don't want anything to pollute him. So bringing an offering that is like this does this because it's got this corruption in it. Draw near with it then to your governor. Would he be pleased with you? Would he accept you? Would he naso your panim? Would he lift up your face favorably? Said Yehovah Zevaot. And now you entreat the face of El to show favor to us. This has been done by your hands. Would he lift up your face? Said Yehovah Zevaot. Okay, so we can see, if you offer something like this, defiles Yehovah, and he would not accept it. We think about it in human terms, which is what he's inviting us to do. He says, go to your boss. Go to your boss with something that your boss knows is rubbish. Is he going to accept it? Would you do it to him? If you wouldn't do it to him, why are you doing it to me? You not understand who I am? Who among you would shut the doors so that you would not kindle fire on my altar for naught? I have no pleasure in you. And it really does baffle people, I think, that they can bring something as an offering to Yehovah, and he doesn't have any pleasure in what they've brought because they've not brought it according to what he's asked for. Said Yehovah Zevaot, nor do I accept a mincha from your hands. And people think, wow, a mincha, that's a present. I didn't have to bring this. I brought this of my own material wealth. And he says, well, I don't accept it from you. It's not acceptable to me. These things have to be done in accordance with obedience. So I think that's a huge component of what Yehovah wants from an offering. He always speaks, doesn't he? And he says, what need have I of incense from Shiva? I don't need these things. You could bring me a lake of oil. You bring me 10,000 burnt offerings. What does that actually mean for me? The important component of them, which makes them acceptable, is that they've been done in line with obedience. For from the sunrise even to sunset, my name is great among nations, and in every place incense is presented. It's the word katar. It implies incense. It's something. Katar is when you burn something as an offering. It's presented to my name, and a tehoa mincha. For my name is great among nations, said Yehovah. So again, when we're bringing things to Yehovah, we don't just think that he will accept anything just because we've thought to bring it. People were obviously thinking, okay, so Yehovah requires an offering. Great, he requires an offering. What can we bring to him? I know, bring the blind cow. blind cow is just a bit of a liability anyway. Looking after it's a bit more hassle than it's worth. Take the blind cow or the lame cow or the cow that's going to die anyway. If he wants an offering, we've done it. We've done what he's asked for. He's asked for an offering. We've just given him a rubbish one. But you are chalaling me in what you say. The table of Yehovah is ga'al's polluted, and its fruit, its lechem, is despicable. And you said, oh, what weariness. And you sneered at it, said Yehovah Zevaot. And you brought in the stolen, the lame, and the sick. Thus you have brought in the offering, the mincha. Should I accept this from your hand, said Yehovah. And I want you to consider this in the context of things that have happened recently at the fellowship. Okay, when Charlie was talking on the Feast of First Fruits, he talked about bringing a first fruits offering. It's important that we do that. It doesn't have to be very much. And you don't bring it to us, you bring it to the least of the brethren. Well, it's important that we do that, even if it's a small amount. They just came with a sheaf, single sheaf, first fruits of their harvest. But when you heard about that, did you go and do it? Or did you say, oh, what weariness, and you sneered at it? You despised the word of Yehovah when you knew that something was required of you. These things are so important, and they judge the thoughts and intents of our heart. We get to a point and we think, oh, we keep the Torah. We keep the Torah. And Charlie's talked about the attitude of mind that we should have, where we're looking for extra things. We're like, are there any more laws that I can be doing? I want to do as much Torah as I possibly can. I want to be blessed. But what is the attitude of mind that you have when you hear about this? Okay, the Feast of Shavuot's coming up. We offer the first fruits of our harvest. And I'll talk about this in the third part. But when you hear about that, what's the response that you have? Is it, oh, great. Got to give an offering to Yehovah, first fruits. Thus you have brought in the mincha. Should I accept this from your hand, said Yehovah? For cursed be the deceiver who has a male in his flock and makes a vow and is sacrificing to Yehovah what is shechat. And this word means corrupted. Okay, it's not blemished, it's what is corrupted. It's the corruption that's entered into the creation. For I am a great king, said Yehovah Zevaot, and my name is feared among nations. Numbers 19 verse 2 says, this is a chukah of the Torah, which Yehovah has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel that you bring a red heifer, a perfect one, a complete one, in which there is no ma'um, and on which a yoke has never come. And I'll put this verse in because we're talking about a sacrifice to Yehovah cannot have a blemish. Okay, it can't be cut, it can't be bruised, it can't be damaged in any way. And we're very familiar with the idea that Yeshua was our red heifer sacrifice. So the question comes from anti-missionaries. How was Yeshua acceptable as a sacrifice before Yehovah if he was cut, if he was bruised? You know, he was in a real state when he died. How is that an acceptable offering to Yehovah? But of course what they're missing, as with all of these things that people miss, like him paying the ransom price, so he was able to die for our sin. He wasn't taking the punishment, he was paying the ransom price. With this, what they're not appreciating is that if he was to be offered in the earthly tabernacle or temple, he wouldn't have been acceptable as an offering. But that's not what was happening. He wasn't being offered in the earthly tabernacle to make atonement for us in that sense. He was being offered in the heavenly tabernacle. And as we've seen, blemishes are moral blemishes as well. He was unblemished. This is what the scriptures mean when they say he was offered as a lamb unblemished to Elohim. Obviously he was blemished when he was killed physically, but that's not the realm in which it operates. Okay, this is the Greek word for a blemish, momas. Blemish, a blot, or a disgrace. This is the word that you'll find in the Septuagint instead of a blemish. In the New Testament, it's only actually used once, and it's used like this, of men who are a disgrace to society. You'll see it here. But these, like natural unreasoning beasts, have been born to be caught and destroyed. Blaspheme that which they do not know shall be destroyed in their destruction. Being about to receive the wages of unrighteousness, deeming indulgence in the day of pleasure, spots and momas, reveling in their own deceptions while they feast with you. So in Hebrew, you would say something has got a blemish, or you'd say something does not have a blemish. It's either got a ma'um or it hasn't got a ma'um. That's not how it works in Greek. You don't say something's got a momas or it's not got a momas. In Greek, you would say something was amomas, that it was without blemish. Without blemish is a sacrifice without spot or blemish. Morally, without blemish, faultless or unblameable. So just like ma'um can be used in both senses, this can be used in both senses. And this shows us something very interesting for us when we're considering atonement being made for us, and us being made clean, and us being presented to Yehovah. 1 Peter 1:18-19 says, knowing that you were redeemed from your futile way of life, inherited from your fathers, not with what is corruptible, silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Messiah, as of a lamb, unblemished, amomas, and spotless. So that's how he was unblemished. How much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the everlasting Spirit offered himself amomas to Elohim. So this is how he was unblemished. But it's important for us too. It says, in order to present it to himself a splendid assembly, not having spot or wrinkle or any of this sort, but that it might be set apart, kadosh and amomas. The word actually means, instead of blameless, is blemishless. Okay, it does mean blameless, but more directly it means blemishless. Blessed be the Elohim and Father of our Master Yeshua Messiah, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenlies in Messiah, even as he chose us in him in before the foundation of the world, that we should be set apart and amomas before him in love. And this is really interesting. Yeshua did this to present us to himself, amomas, present us blameless to himself. Okay. That we should be set apart and amomas before him. Okay, and in the Hebrew, that's his panim, his presence. Colossians 1:21-22 says, and you who were estranged and enemies in the mind by wicked works, but now he is completely restored. That's that word, that apokatalasso, to favor. In the body of his flesh through death, to present you set apart and amomas, and unreprovable before him. And we can understand this to be, well, we're going to be blameless before him as we walk out our lives because we're ever before him. But there's a more direct way to understand this that we see happening. Jude 1:24 says, and to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you blemishless before the presence of his esteem, before the presence of his glory. Okay, so we are to be presented before his glory. And we see a group of people being presented before his glory who are presented as the first fruits. They are those who are not defiled with women, for they are maidens. They are those following the Lamb wherever he leads them on. They were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to Elohim and to the Lamb. In their mouth was found no falsehood, for they are amomas before the throne of Elohim, before the presence of his glory. These people are literally in heaven, and it's my own personal understanding of the scriptures that we will be presented before him in heaven as well, which is what I think this is talking about. And then we will come down in the New Jerusalem, my personal understanding. But we are to be presented like these animals were to be presented in the tabernacle. We are to be presented before the presence of his esteem or the presence of his glory. Okay, so now we can understand the importance of atonement. If we are to physically, if we're part of these people, if we're to physically appear before him in heaven, atonement needs to be made in heaven. Remember, those things needed to be cleansed just like the earthly things, but with better blood, with Messiah's blood, so that we can appear in his presence. And when a man draws near with a zevach shlamim to Yehovah, a peace offering, to complete a vow or a voluntary offering from the cattle or the sheep, it is to be complete, to be accepted. There's to be no ma'um in it. Those blind or broken or having a cut or have an ulcer or eczema or scabs, you do not draw near to Yehovah, nor make an offering by fire of them on the altar to Yehovah. As for a bull or a lamb that has any limb deformed or dwarfed, you do prepare as a voluntary offering, but not for a vow. It's not accepted. That's really interesting, okay? For the payment of a vow, it cannot have this corruption in it. And we've seen throughout this Torah portion that these things are not acceptable to Yehovah. Okay, you could think of them as he doesn't like them as much. They're not good things to him. They're not the best that you could bring to him. And we've seen before how the law and how the word of Yehovah judges the thoughts and intents of the heart. So what we have here is something that is permitted. Right? If you want for a voluntary offering, you can bring something that has a deformed limb. You can do that. But would we then do that? In response to this law, how do we read the law? Do we read the law as a way to find a loophole around doing something? Or, I've always thought when I was bringing offerings, I wish I could bring the one with the deformed limb. And now I'm allowed to bring the one with the deformed limb. I'm just going to bring it as a voluntary offering. Is that how we say it? Or if we were to bring a voluntary offering, would the right attitude of mind be, I'm going to bring a tamim one from the flock. I'm going to bring one which he says is the most acceptable to him. These things, I firmly believe, are in the word as specific tests. It's just how you treat the stranger and all those things. Do not draw near to Yehovah what is bruised or crushed or torn or cut, nor do it in your land. And from a son of a stranger's hand, the foreigner, and Nakar and Nachri, you do not draw near with any of these as the lechem of your Elohim. So what is the lechem of your Elohim? It's the offerings. For their corruption is in them. Again, all these things are all tied throughout the scriptures to corruption. And defects, ma'um, are in them. They are not acceptable for you. Romans 8:20-23 says, for the creation was subjected to futility, not from choice, but because of him who subjected it in anticipation, that the creation itself should be delivered from the bondage to corruption. Okay, there will come a time when there is not this corruption, when everything will be made new in the regeneration. But while we're in the state where the creation's in bondage to corruption, some of the fallout of that is that these animals will have the deformed limbs, or will have deformed limbs, or whatever the case is, and we cannot draw near to him with those things. For we know that the creation groans together and suffers the pain of childbirth together until now, which is an interesting illusion. Okay, it's like childbirth, in order to bring forth a child, you have to go through a load of pain. And this is how it's been with the creation. Yehovah is outside the time. He knew that man would sin. He knew man would do all of the terrible things that man did. But it was necessary in order to bring forth the holy to himself. And not only so, but even we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we ourselves also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. Okay, and again, it makes me wonder, will we be good looking? Will we have these blemishes? You think about Yeshua. Okay, when Yeshua was raised from the dead, he had blemishes. He was marked. So how does that work? Well, did he have his spirit body then? Okay, because his physical body disappeared from the tomb, or was his physical body resurrected like Lazarus until he ascended to heaven and he got his spiritual body? Not sure how it works. These are all questions that fire off in my mind. Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, when a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall be 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day and thereafter it is acceptable as an ishah to Yehovah. And this is very interesting, because when we understand this, we can think of it in terms of his compassion again. We can think of it as, well, he's allowing the newborn baby to stay with its mother, and so its mother doesn't mourn or whatever. And we can think of it in those terms that we would think of it. But the context that this appears in, I don't think it's talking about that. Or it will be a component of it. Yehovah is all encompassing. but it's acceptable as an offering made by fire. And we know these things in the realm of the clean and the unclean, and we know that the mother has to have a process to make herself clean afterwards. And I think, well, I'll certainly come prove it, that this is actually talking about the newborn baby being unclean and not being able to be offered. It would not be acceptable as an ishah before Yehovah until that time. And it says, but do not slaughter a cow or a sheep and its young on the same day. And you can't really understand that in terms of compassion. Like, well, why do you not do that? Again, I can't explain it to you and give you a definite answer, but because of the context in which it appears, with it to be things that are profane, things that are unclean, I think it must be to do with that. When you bring a sacrifice of thanksgiving to Yehovah, bring it of your own will. I realized as I was going through this and I read that, I thought when I was talking about the spiritual sacrifices, I talked about the sacrifice of thanksgiving being a spiritual sacrifice that you could make. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about a peace offering that you bring as a sacrifice of thanksgiving. From a spiritual point of view, we can offer sacrifices of thanksgiving. But the sacrifice of thanksgiving that the scriptures refer to, I would imagine in most of the cases, would be the actual peace offering. It is eaten that same day, leave none of it till morning. I am Yehovah. And you have cherished my commands and done them. I am Yehovah. And it's funny, when he uses this future perfect tense, very often it's accompanied with this, I am Yehovah. I am the one who is outside of time. And do not halal my Kodesh name. And I have been Kadashed among the children of Israel. I am Yehovah, who Kadashes you, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim to be your Elohim. And it's poignant that he puts this at this point. He's gone through all of these instructions about how he is holy and how he's removed from the world. And then he says, I'm your Elohim who's removed you from the world. I've removed you from Egypt, from all of that stuff that was profane in order to be Kadash to me, or to Kadash you to me. Okay, so 24 is the last chapter. It's a very short chapter. I'm aware that this part's been quite long, but to avoid doing a little tiny bit at the end and keeping you all here, I'll just run through this. There's not much in it. Yehovah spoke to Moshe saying, command the children of Israel that they bring to you clear oil of pressed olives for the light to make the lamps burn continually. This is the actual word for bring, whereas the other ones are draw near. This is what happens if you bring something to somebody else, you lakash it. And Charlie's been through this and given a detailed explanation of it multiple times, so I'm not going to go through it again. I'll ask him in the break if he knows what teaching that's in, so I can direct people to it. Outside the veil of the witness in the tent of meeting, Aharon is to set it from evening until morning in the presence of Yehovah continually, a chukah forever throughout your generations. So Aharon was to set the lamps in the presence of Yehovah to burn continually before him. He is to set the lamps on the tahor gold lampstand, the clean gold lampstand. And now we can understand why pure gold or clean gold has to be used in the clean room, if you like, in the presence of Yehovah continually. And you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it, 2/10 of an ephah in each cake. And you shall set them in 2 rows, 6 on a row, on a tahor table. So this table of showbread was to be pure as well, in the presence of Yehovah. And you shall put clear frankincense on each row, and it shall be on the lechem as a remembrance portion, an offering made by fire to Yehovah. On every Shabbat, he is to set it in the presence of Yehovah continually from the children of Israel, an everlasting covenant. So here we've got an example of a mincha, which is a mandatory mincha that had to be brought from the children of Israel. But we can just read over things like this: a remembrance portion, an offering made by fire. Well, wait there. Okay, we're talking about the table of showbread. It's got 12 loaves on the table of showbread. How is that an offering made by fire? How does that actually work? We go back to the instructions. It says, when anyone draws near with a mincha korban, one of the only times that this korban word is used, as well as mincha, to Yehovah, his means of drawing near is to be of fine flour, and he shall put oil on it and put frankincense on it. Then he shall bring it to the sons of Aharon the priests, and he shall take from it his hand filled with fine flour and oil with all the incense, and the priest shall catar it as a remembrance portion, which is what it was talking about, on the altar, an offering made by fire, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. And the rest of the grain offering is for Aharon and his sons, most set apart. Okay, so this is what we have happening here with the table of showbread. Of the 12 loaves, there was a remembrance portion, an offering made by fire to Yehovah, taken of each of them. And then the next instruction says, and it shall be for Aharon and his sons, and they shall eat it in the set apart place. Okay, actually in the Hebrew it says in a set apart place. This phrase is not used very often in the Hebrew because it is most set apart to Aaron. This is holy to Aaron. It's in fact of the stuff that's holy to Aaron, it's the most holy, the holy of holies to Aaron. From the offerings of Yehovah made by fire and everlasting law, chok. So we can see much more of how these things were prepared when we actually understand what the Torah is saying. Okay, so this is the very last issue that I'm going to deal with. It says, the son of a Israelite woman whose father was a Mitzrayite. And these are the important things. When we read this, we kind of don't really understand what the significance of that is. His mother was an Israelite. His father was an Egyptian. Your identity, for want of a better word, would be passed on to you from your father. So in the eyes of Israel, this person would be an Egyptian who an Israelite had married. Okay, when father was an Egyptian, Israelite had married his father, he was an Egyptian. And the Israelites woman's son, and a man of Israel strove in the camp. And the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name and cursed. So they brought him to Moshe. Now his mother's name was Shlomith, the daughter of Divri of the tribe of Dan. So it seems to me that what's going on is they're thinking, well, is there some kind of difference here? Is he an Israelite? Or, is the fact that his mum is an Israelite, does that change things at all? And they put him under guard that it might be declared to them at the mouth of Yehovah. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, bring the one who is cursed outside the camp, and all those who heard him shall lay their hands on his head, and all the congregation shall stone him. And speak to the children of Israel, saying, anyone who curses his Elohim shall bear his sin. And he who blasphemes the name of Yehovah shall certainly be put to death, and all the congregation shall certainly stone him. The Geir, okay, somebody who is dwelling with Israel but is not actually an Israelite, as well as the native. So this is the problem which is being addressed here by Yehovah. When he blasphemes the name, he is put to death. And he who smites the life from any man shall certainly be put to death. What we're going to hear here is Yehovah's mishpat, his judgments in certain things. But it's all to do with this man striving with the Israelite man. And I want to cover this because this is something that has come up recently. It'll take maybe 5 minutes to cover it. He who smites the life from any man shall certainly be put to death. That is an absolute statement. If you smite the life from somebody, you are to be put to death. And we know why these things are to be, because it's only by the blood of the one who shed the blood that atonement can be made. So you are to be put to death. A caveat is given, and has already been given in Exodus. If the thief is found breaking in, and he is smitten so that he dies, there is no guilt for his bloodshed. So if you nakar somebody who is breaking in, there's no guilt for his bloodshed. And people take this statement and they say, see, if somebody's breaking in, we can kill them. The next thing that is said is, if the sun has risen on him, there is guilt for his bloodshed. So if you find him breaking in and the sun is risen on him, there is guilt for his bloodshed. You cannot shed his blood then. I imagine what is happening is if it's nighttime and there's some kind of scuffle and he ends up dead, there's no guilt for his death. However, if you read that and you think, it's now okay for me to kill people who are breaking in, and that's what you want, that's going to judge the thoughts and intents of your heart. I had somebody try to justify this to me, and they say, oh no, that's just your interpretation. What this actually means is, if you go and find them the next day and then you kill them, then you bear guilt. That's not what it says, is it? It's not me that's adding the interpretation there. What it actually says is, if you find them breaking in and the sun has risen on them, there is guilt. That's literally the situation. If we wanted to interpret it differently, then what we would be best saying is, maybe it means that, but the likelihood is that it means if the sun's come up, we're going to bear guilt. So we need to avoid that. It really does boggle the mind that people read things like this in the Word and they're like, now it's okay for me to kill people. I've been wanting to kill people. If they've come to do me harm, then I've been wanting to be able to kill them. And now that I've seen this, I feel quite good about the fact that I can kill somebody if they break in. This person actually said to me, if somebody breaks into my house, you better believe I'm going to be killing them. Something along that. That might not be their actual words. Better believe I'll be shooting them or something like that. It really does boggle the mind. That's not what this verse means. The rule is, if you smite a man to death, you are put to death. That's it. In the situation that it's nighttime, they're breaking in, they end up dead, you do not bear guilt. That's kind of like a measure to stop you being unlawfully killed. People look at this verse, you do not murder, you do not ratzach, and they say, okay, so you're not allowed to murder, but if somebody's coming to do you harm and you kill them, that's not murder, that's self-defense. But that's taking our legal system and applying it to the Torah. It's taking something profane and applying it to the holy. It's profaning the holy Torah to do that. Our definition of what murder is and what murder isn't doesn't mean anything. What the Hebrew says is, you do not ratzach, or lo ratzach, thou shalt not ratzach. The word is used to mean premeditated murder, accidental murder, as an avenger or as a slayer, someone who kills intentionally. And if you accidentally kill somebody, you can go to a city of refuge and you stay there until the death of the high priest. Okay, but somebody can avenge that blood, because the Torah says that the atonement is only made by the blood of him who shed it. So we can't take our definition of murder and put it on this and say, I'm not murdering them, I'm defending myself. That's not how the Torah works. The word of Elohim is living and working and sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting through to even the dividing of soul and spirit and of joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intents of the heart. There's no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom is our account. When we hear these laws and we think, oh, that's allowing me to do something that the Torah would otherwise not allow me to do, what we need to come to terms with is, we actually want to do what the Torah declares to be wrong in the first place, and we're trying to use the word of Elohim to justify it. It's like people with Paul, when you say that you're to keep the law, and you show them all of the scriptures about keeping the law, and then they'll pull a verse of Paul out of context, and they'll try and use it. It's like they're trying to use the word of God to defend themselves against the word of God, which they hate. It's just bizarre to me. So he who smites the life from any man shall certainly be put to death. He who smites a beast repays it body for body. So you kill someone's animal, you've got to get them another animal. When a man inflicts a ma'um upon his neighbor, as he is done, so it is done to him. So you do something to somebody, you injure them, it's done to you as well. This serves a very important purpose from what I can reckon of it. At the moment, if we think, I'm going to go and do something to hurt somebody, then it's almost a thing that people can do flippantly and be like, yeah, I'll hurt them. They don't really understand what they're going to do to that person. They don't really consider what they're going to do to that person. But if the punishment for doing that to the other person is that it will be done to you, then it becomes a lot more real to you. Then you really start to consider, what am I actually going to do to that person? Because it's going to be done to me, and I'm going to think about it being done to me, and that's what's going to stop me doing it to the other person. So you come to a whole different appreciation of the act that you're going to commit when this is the punishment. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, as he inflicts a ma'um upon him, so it is done to him. And when Yeshua said, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, what was happening is he was fulfilling the law. He said, I am going to fulfill the law. I'm going to fully preach the law. You've heard it said this. And what they had heard said is that when somebody does something to you, you take vengeance on them and you do like for like to the other person. And Yeshua was saying that's not the way that it is. All of this, what we're hearing now, is Yehovah's mishpat, which is to be put in place by the judges. Only a judge can do this, and yet the people were misapplying this, and they were using it to say, if somebody comes and does something to me, I'm going to do the exact same thing back to them. That was never the case. The thing would have to be brought before the judges. There would need to be witnesses, and the witnesses would need to understand that if there were false witnesses, then the same would be done back to them. That's Yehovah's system of justice. As you do to somebody else, so it is done to you. He who smites a beast repays it. He who smites a man to death is put to death. Same thing that you've done is what happens to you. You say the way of Yehovah is not right. Is it not your ways that are not right? You're thinking, well, that's really harsh. If I go and I stab somebody in the arm, I'm going to get stabbed in the arm. That's not right. Is it that that's not right? Or is it stabbing someone in the arm that is the thing that's not right? Have a think about it. Verse 22 says, you are to have one justice, one mishpat for the stranger and for the native. I am Yehovah your Elohim. And Moshe spoke to the children of Israel, and they brought the one who cursed outside the camp and stoned him with stones. And the children of Israel did as Yehovah commanded Moses. So this is something worthy of our consideration as well. Okay? Stoning somebody to death with stones is an incredibly brutal, just terrifying prospect. Deuteronomy 13, 3-11 says, do not listen to the words of that prophet. So this is a prophet who's coming to try and get you to stray from the way that Elohim has told you to walk in. Or that dreamer of dreams. For Yehovah is, your Elohim is trying you to know whether you love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul. Walk after Yehovah your Elohim, fear him, cherish his commands, obey his voice, serve him, and cling to him. So if anyone comes and tells you not to do something, don't listen to them. Cling to what Yehovah has told you. That prophet or that dreamer of dreams is put to death because he has spoken apostasy against Yehovah, or literally spoken to turn you against Yehovah, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to make you stray from the way, Yeshua is the way, the truth, and the life, in which Yehovah your Elohim commanded you to walk. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst. The word for midst is karev. We've looked at karav, which is to draw near. Karev means inward parts. Okay, ba'ar means to purge something with fire. So it's saying purge in the strongest terms. Purge from your inward parts. Who's he talking to? He's talking to Israel. We are the one new man, Israel. They were described as the one man. As we are the body of Mashiach, they were a body as well. Purge them from your inward parts. And we get similar advice given to us now, to purge the evil from our inward parts as the body. When your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend who is as your own soul, entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods which you have not known, neither you nor your fathers, of the gods of the people which are all around you, near to you or far off from you, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. Do not agree with him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pardon him, nor spare him or conceal him. And this has come up as a relevant thing in recent memory and even in the past couple of weeks. We've had somebody come to people who are members of this fellowship and say to them that they should leave this fellowship and go to another fellowship. It's like, there's not enough love in this fellowship. Okay, it's really good at teaching the Torah, but there's just not enough love there. Instead, you should come here where we are more tolerant of sin, is the implication. Obviously, I'm not advocating stoning people like that, but that's what Yehovah would have done to them, because he sees how serious it is for somebody to come and try and lead you astray from the way in which Yehovah has commanded you to live. It's so important to him. This also happened in the past couple of weeks when somebody, I don't know exactly where they're coming from, but they got into very militant veganism, and they started talking about the Essene gospel of peace, the God of the Essenes basically, which has got no animal sacrifice and all that sort of stuff. All of that's removed from the scriptures. And they're posting about it, trying to sway people into following that or to see that as correct. Or how can you harm the animals, man? This is how Yehovah sees these things. And it's so important that when we see something like that, we don't do what he's saying to do here. He says, do not listen to him, nor shall your eye pardon him. What does that mean, your eye pardon him? It means basically you give them a break over it. You go, oh, it's okay. No, it doesn't matter. That's just them doing their thing. Don't do that. When Yehovah's got a standard and he says this is not acceptable, stick by that standard. Don't make your decisions for yourself and have your own mishpat and your own justice about how you deal with those things. You shall certainly kill him. Your hand is first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. Okay, even if they're really, really close to you, your hand is first to kill him. Why? Because you recognize that Yehovah's ways are the ways that are right. So your hand is the first to do that. You don't want to do it, obviously. Someone really close to you, a friend who is as your own soul. You don't want to do that to somebody like that. But what this is saying is you cherish the law. You cherish the ways of Yehovah. Your hand is first to kill him. If that's what the law says, you're the first one to do it. You shall stone him with stones until he dies, because he sought to entice you away from Yehovah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, from the house of bondage. And let all Yisrael hear and fear, and not again do any such evil matter as this in your inward parts. So the point isn't to be stoning people who are bad. The point is that people recognize that there is a standard. And if they want to go astray, if they want to listen to sin rather than master sin, that they will be dealt with and they will be removed. And this is the exact same standard that we hear is to be applied in a fellowship. Deuteronomy 17 verse 12 says, the man who acts arrogantly so as to not listen to the priest who stands there to serve before Yehovah, your Elohim, or to the judge, that man shall die, and you shall purge the evil from Israel. Purge with fire the evil from Israel. I wrote to you in my letter not to keep company with fornicators, and I certainly did not mean with those of the world who fornicate, or with greedy of gain, or swindlers, or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. Okay, so he's not saying that we shouldn't exist in the world, or that we shouldn't company with anybody who is sinning, because then we'd have to just remove ourselves entirely from the world. But now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone who is called a brother, if he is one who fornicates, or greedy of gain, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Do you not judge those who are inside? But Elohim judges those who are outside, and put away the wicked one from among you. This is him writing in Greek, obviously, but it's the same concept, to purge the evil from your midst. And the same rules apply. Your eye shall not pardon them. If somebody's in this position, then obviously you go to them, you speak to them, you explain the situation, and you give them the chance to repent. But if they refuse to repent of these things, your eye doesn't pardon them and go, oh, it's JP. JP, let JP alone. I'm sure you'll get it eventually. That's not the way that we're to be. Our hand is to be first against them. Okay, we have that standard. And we've dealt with this as a fellowship before, where we got to the point where people were unrepentant and they had to be removed. But this is how we should all have as an outlook as individuals with other people who are involved in sin also. In Deuteronomy 17:6-7 says, at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall he die. Shall he that is to be put to death be put to death. He is not put to death by the mouth of one witness. The hand of the witnesses shall be first against him to put him to death, and the hand of all the people last, so that you purge the evil from your inward parts. So 2 or 3 witnesses are needed, but the witnesses must understand that if they witness against somebody, to have a punishment done to them, and they're being false and they're lying, what they thought to do to someone else is done to them in return. Deuteronomy 19:18-19, the last verse that we'll look at, says, and the judges shall diligently search and see if the witness is a false witness, and be falsely accused his brother. And you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst. And this is what was most likely in my mind to be what was happening with Yeshua. When they brought the woman caught in adultery to Yeshua, and they were witnessing against her, what did Yeshua say? He said, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. That was what was required, that they would be the ones to cast the first stone. But if they were a false witness, then they would be stoned to death. So I think, for whatever that's worth, that what he wrote on the ground was possibly the reference to this verse. The point that I'm making, and then we'll come to a close now, is that YHVH's system of justice is, as you thought to do to someone else, so it be done to you. And what I think that achieves is you actually think about what you're going to do to someone else. You're not just flippantly going to be a false witness and they deserve to die anyway. You're actually brought face to face with what that would actually feel like to be about to be put to death, so that you don't do those things. We'll take a break there, and then we'll come back and look at the calendar. Okay, we're back. So we're going to deal with the calendar, everyone's favorite subject. Last time when I was going through it, I'd said, YHVH showed me this information. And I think that was one of the things that people took umbrage with, basically. And I didn't say it in order to convince anybody of anything. It's not like, YHVH showed me this. And people said things like, everyone always says that YHVH showed them the right calendar. And it's like, well, yes, maybe they do. Maybe people always ascribe, when they've come to some kind of understanding, they say that YHVH has shown them it. But that's not the same thing at all. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, YHVH showed me a new calendar that is the calendar that matches the Bible. They're 2 completely different things. And the reason that I said it wasn't to convince anyone of it, I think, or for it to be a big deal. The reason I said it was to ascribe it to YHVH, so that it wasn't understood as, this is JP's calendar, not my calendar. It said exactly what happened, exactly how the information was revealed. That's just the way that it was. That's why I said it. It's not meant to be some kind of thing to convince people or anything. So with that out of the way, people have asked, what about this element of this calendar? This calendar is right. This calendar is perfect. What is the problem with these calendars, basically? Why not just follow the Jewish calendar? Yeshua was following the Jewish calendar. My own personal thought on why Yeshua wasn't so concerned with what calendar was going on the earth is for the same reason that he could be offered with blemishes, because he wasn't offered in the earthly tabernacle. He was offered in the heavenly tabernacle, and just like Yom Kippur is going to be fulfilled in the future, he didn't even ascend to his Father for days after he was killed. For a long period of time after he was killed, that's when he went to heaven to serve as priest and could fulfill those things in the heavenly realm. So I personally think that's why the calendar that was being followed on the earth wasn't such a big issue. And I think that's why it calls it the Feasts of the Jews. Personally, that's what I think. I don't know whether that's correct at all, but just on that point. But as to the other calendars, the reason why it is not something that we can follow is because there is one problem which is inherent in every single calendar that there is. Okay. So what is this problem? This problem is, it's a fancy word that makes it sound like people know what they're talking about. And it's almost like it adds some kind of credibility to the calendar that, oh yes, the calendar works if you do this thing. And this word is, intercalation. Sounds good, doesn't it? Makes it sound like it's a legitimate calendar. Oh yes, our calendar, the form of intercalation in our calendar is this. Obviously, calendars need intercalation. What intercalation actually means is our calendar doesn't work. But instead of just letting it go, we're going to fudge it. We're going to add this in, or we're going to add that in. And if you add in a 13th month, then you can use the moon for months. Brilliant. We'll just add in a 13th month then. And then the calendar is perfect. Or we'll add in a day every year, and then the calendar is perfect. You just need to intercalate. Now, what it means is the calendar doesn't work. If you ever hear anyone using this word, what they're directly telling you is, this calendar's rubbish. Don't listen to anything I say. So, intercalation. Lunar months, such as on the traditional Jewish calendar, mean you need to add the 13th month on, arbitrarily decided upon in leap years. Leap years are not found in the Bible. The Enoch calendar and the Zadok calendar both add in an arbitrarily decided upon day. The Enoch calendar arbitrarily dictates a pattern of 2 30-day months, followed by a third 31-day month. This gives a year of 364 days. And the Enoch calendar is very similar. It should be a red flag when you say, our calendar has a year of 364 days. Because there are not 364 days in a year. Right then, you should be crossing that calendar off as a possibility. So this is timeanddate.com about the Jewish calendar and how it all works with their leap years. It says, a leap year occurs 7 times in the 17-year Metonic cycle, with years 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, and 19 of the cycle being leap years. This corresponds to a frequency of every 2 to 3 years. Again, our calendar doesn't work, so we have to do this. And they know that this is the reason that, or they know that it's because the calendar doesn't work. Rabbi Hillel II had to come along and create this system in order to fudge it. Using the lunar months just doesn't work. Now, this is something that people came to me with. They said, you're wrong. There is a 13th month in the scriptures, and it's in the book of Ezekiel. It's when Ezekiel lies on his side for 430 days, for 430 years. Ezekiel 1:1-3 says, it came to be in the 30th year, in the 4th Chodesh, on the 5th of the Chodesh, as I was among the exiles by the river Kavar, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of Elohim. On the 5th of the Chodesh, in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's exile, the word of Yehovah came expressly to Yechezkel, the priest, Ezekiel. Okay, so in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's exile, the word came to Ezekiel. Okay? So people take this in the 5th year, and they say it's the 4th Chodesh of the year. Take this, and then They go on with their reading of the book of Ezekiel, and they come to lie on your left side for the iniquity of the house of Israel. You shall lie on the left side 390 days, 40 days for the house of Judah. Okay? And they say, okay, so that's 430 years. And we began in the 5th year, the 4th Chodesh. And then they say, the next date that we get is in the 6th year, in the 6th Chodesh. Okay, so this is a year on. It's actually 14 or 15 months if you work it out correctly. But they say this is the 13th month in Ezekiel. There has to be 13 months in order for it to be 430 days. But this is all based on a false premise. We'll look at false premises as we go on. What it actually said in Ezekiel 1 is, in the 30th year, in the 4th Chodesh. And then it says, in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's exile. So when was the 5th year of his exile? It was in the 30th year. And we'll find out what it's the 30th year of in a little bit. So in the 30th year, in the 4th Chodesh, the word came to Ezekiel. And then in Ezekiel 8, it says in the 6th year, in the 6th Chodesh. So there's not 13 months in between them. There's actually 24 years in between these two dates. And we can see what's going on with this in the whatever year when we go through the rest of the book of Ezekiel. In the 7th year, in the 9th year in chapter 20, in the 11th year in chapter 26, back to the 10th year in chapter 29, in the 11th year in chapter 30, in the 12th, 32, the 25th year of our exile. So by the time we get to the book, the chapter 40, we find out that it's the exile that he's talking about, and that's the entire context of the book. So it's the 30th year of their exile. The next date given is something that happened in the 6th year of their exile. Very actually simple to understand. There's no 13th month there. I think sometimes when people come to things that explain things that they want to believe, they don't really put much investigation into it. We're going to see other examples of that as we go on. Okay, this is TorahIsLight.org, and this is about the Zadok calendar. It says, with this calendar, the year always contains precisely 364 days. Each year consists of 12 months of 30 days each, plus 4 additional days, one of which is intercalated at the end of each 3-month period. So they've got this false premise to do with the months. The months have to be 30 days each, and we'll look at where they get that from. So what you have to do to have 30-month days is in the 3rd month, you have to stick in an extra day. Perfectly reasonable. Okay, but that, another problem, ends up with 364 days. Thus, the 1st and 2nd months are 30 days long, while the 3rd month totals 31 days. Then the pattern repeats. New Year's Day and the 1st day of each 3-month period always fall on a Wednesday. This is another thing that they've got into their heads that needs to be the case. The year has to fall on a Wednesday. Wednesday is the day mandated as the first day by the creation. Since the heavenly lights, the sun, the moon, and the stars, the basis of any calendar, were created on the 4th day. Okay, so they say it's got to be a Wednesday because that's when the sun and the moon and the stars were created. Doesn't follow. That's not a logical conclusion. The great advantage of the Zadok calendar over its lunar solar rival is that it results in fixed dates for the major festivals. That's its major advantage. But that's completely irrelevant. Why would you think that it was significant that the date on the Gregorian calendar was the same if you were following the Zadok calendar? The Gregorian calendar didn't exist when the Zadok calendar came to be. So its correlation to the Gregorian calendar bears absolutely no significance at all. This is what a false premise is, according to Wikipedia. It's a good description. A false premise is an incorrect preposition that forms the basis of an argument. Okay, since the preposition or assumption is not correct, the conclusion drawn may be in error. And of course, in this case, it does cause an error. When you think it's got to have the dates fall on the Gregorian calendar dates, and it's got to start on a Wednesday, and you think that they're these great things, and you will draw incorrect conclusions. This is where they get the 30 days in a month thing. Flood started, okay, on the 17th of the 2nd. Waters receded from the earth, and waters diminished after 150 days. On the 17th of the 7th, the ark came to a rest. So what they say is, the 17th of the 2nd to the 17th of the 7th, that's 5 months. Then they take that 150 days and they say 5 months, 150 days, 30 days per month. But that doesn't logically follow. Flood started 17th of the 2nd. After 150 days, the waters diminished. And then on the 17th of the 7th, the ark came to a rest. It doesn't say that these two events happened on the same day. And in fact, just logically, if you think about it, how would the waters start to diminish and the ark come to a rest on the same day? So there's 150 days in between the 17th of the 7th and the 17th of the 2nd. But not only 150 days, more than 150 days. Torahslight.org says, we know the sun revolves on a 365.24 something circuit, right? Well, how then does the 364-day work? As with most calendars, even the Gregorian and Hillel, the second calendars, there is a need to intercalate or add days every so often to keep things aligned. You can't do that. You can't say, these calendars are wrong, and just like these wrong calendars, we also have to intercalate. They are no sort of authority. You don't look to the Gregorian calendar and the Hillel, the second calendar, and say, well, they're intercalating. That must mean that intercalating is the right way to do it. That doesn't make sense as an argument. The same thing happens with the Zadok. The question is, how? Since the Zadok calendar is a fixed day calendar beginning with the 4th day every year, the observed equinox would advance a day or two each year, and in 5 to 6 years would be a week behind, thus the need to intercalate. No, thus the demonstration that this calendar is wrong. So how then do we determine when to add a week to keep us in line? This took a lot of investigation and mapping out the moon and sun movements. Method 1 that they have come up with. This is a simple method, and one that I refer to as the blind method. Sounds good so far. It completely disregards the sun and the stars, which I have a problem with because that's what's recorded for us in Genesis 1. But as far as being simple, this is it. Basically, the method waits for the spring equinox to land on the 4th day, and then it intercalates adding a week, and this gives this time period between intercalations. And this method is difficult to pinpoint. It's not difficult to pinpoint and could easily be verified with using only a calendar and the sun. Okay, so one of those was given to us for the division of time. To use a calendar as well. Well, what calendar do you use? You use a Gregorian calendar to do it, to work out this ancient calendar? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The method 2, second method is a fair amount more involved. It involves bringing into play the moon and its alignment with the equinoxes as well. According to the book of Enoch, blah, 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 this is what we do. Mapping out the actual observed alignments, it becomes clear that as we fall behind the spring equinox, the full moon will land 7 days following the end of the previous 364-day, signaling the need to intercalate or add a week to keep us in alignment. This happens every time without fail, proving the moon as a witness, as stated in Psalm 89 and Enoch 74. Anybody else getting some red flags being waved when you're reading this? Sometimes the moon appears to do its own thing and causes an 8-year span between intercalation periods. The 8-year span between intercalation does not happen often, but if it did not happen, the distance between the start of the year and the actual equinox would widen. By using this method, we are kept very close to the equinox, and the pattern of the heavenly movements fits Enoch's description perfectly. Well, the reason that it fits Enoch's description perfectly is because it was a description of the movement of the sun and the moon. That's all that it was. It wasn't some magical thing. It's like, wow, it fits in with Enoch. Okay, this is the Enoch calendar, Testifies of Christ by a Mr. Pratt. No comment. An unexpected feature of the 364-day year is that it results in an average length even more accurate than our modern Gregorian calendar. The actual length of the year is now 365.2422 days. The Gregorian calendar averages 365.2425 days, which is much closer than the former Julian calendar, which averaged 365.25 days. But if 52 weeks are intercalated every 293 years into the calendar of Enoch, it averages 365.2423 days, which is still wrong. This is the calendar of the creator of the universe. And they're saying, whoa, look how much closer it is. Not what I hear when they say that. What I hear is, look how wrong it still is. And what do we have to do to make it this wrong? We have to add in every 293 years. Every 293 years. It's just insanity. It is very surprising that such accuracy can be obtained by intercalating an entire week at a time over so short a time period. Just bizarre. EnochCalendars.webs.com. The Julian calendar, now this is an absolute classic. I want you to, when you read this, think about what they're actually suggesting here. The Julian calendar reduced each hour of the day by 9.86 seconds, so that the hour has about 59 minutes and 50 seconds. The change was so subtle that the Hebrew people were unaware that this minor change could affect anything, let alone their Sabbath day. So subtle a change? We've removed 10 seconds from every hour. Do you not think somebody might have noticed 10 seconds being removed from the hour? And they say that it was the Julian calendar that did it. I mean, I don't even, that's just impossible. That could never have happened. Unless you're going to say that what they did is they reduced the length of a second. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying it reduced it by an hour by a number of seconds. And this had some very interesting consequences. And I've had somebody come to me with something very similar than this. I'm not sure if they were talking about this exact thing, but they were talking about 4 minutes per day being removed from a day. And if they were actually there, it would mean that we had 364 days in a year and not 365. So when I'm showing you this, I'm not just showing you some craziness on the internet. This is stuff that people actually believe. And again, when people come to something that explains something that they want to hold on to, it seems that logic and reason go out of the window. The 9.8 seconds per hour equates to almost 4 minutes per day. That is taken out of each of the 364 days to create the 365th. This is even better. That is March 15th. That's the created day, in case you were wondering. It's meant to go March 14th and then March 16th. But no, they've inserted March 15th. That's why our days are called sidereal days, as the days have 23 hours, 56 minutes, and about 5 seconds. And it is not a true 24-hour day. Did anybody not notice that we are not following a 24-hour day? I'd have thought it would be pretty obvious. We've all done poorly here. The following is the formula that governments use to make a sidereal day. It's the government. The governments have all got together and they've created these sidereal days for us, or an extra day. And it basically just takes minutes out from the original 364 days to create another day. Genius. Some mathematics. That's the formula the governments are using, though, so it's pretty important for us to know. Exactly 24 hours in each of Enoch's 364 days, though. So if we were following really 24-hour days, we would end up with 364 in a year. So you can see that the extra day, the 365th, or March 15th, as it is known, does not exist. But the minutes do exist. And the Enoch calendar leaves the minutes where they belong for a 364-day year that has exactly 24 hours in each day. That sounds like exactly how it should be. The Gregorian calendar adds days by reducing minutes. Brilliant. I'm so glad that I've got this understanding now. Praise Yah for the internet. Right, okay, so this is the actual definition of a sidereal day. A sidereal day is the time between two consecutive transits of the first point of Aries. It represents the time taken by the Earth to rotate on its axis relative to the stars. It's almost 4 minutes shorter than the solar day because of the Earth's orbital motion. So there is a thing called a sidereal day. That's with the best deceptions. There's a nugget of truth embedded in all of the tat. Problem is that a sidereal day, it's about the Earth relative to the stars rather than the Earth relative to the sun, or the stars relative to the Earth rather than the sun relative to the Earth. So it's a real thing, but obviously we don't follow sidereal days. We obviously follow solar days because our days are 24 hours long, and nobody has ever said ever that we follow a sidereal day apart from certain proponents of this calendar. The 365th created day, March 15th, is inserted into the calendar each year next to the last day of the year, which is March 16th. Why not January the 21st? Why are they picking on March 15th? The same procedure is followed again to create a leap day every 4th year, where additional minutes are taken out of each of the original 364 days to create the 366th day. They're stealing minutes from the days and making other days, which is February 29th. They got this one right. Which is inserted into the Gregorian calendar at the end of the 50th week every 4th year. Problem is, okay, even if you took that to be true, you took our days were 4 minutes shorter, and then you project that out over a year, that doesn't give you 365 days. Okay, it gives you an extra 24.8 hours. So it'll give you an extra day, 0.8 hours, which wouldn't be right anyway. So it would still be wrong, even if what they were saying was correct. But if you followed the sidereal day, if you said, we follow the sidereal day, what the consequence of that actually would be is a 366th day, not going back to 364. So, with all of that nonsense out of the way, and these are all the things that people suggest is that, this is actually the true calendar. What we need is a calendar that doesn't have the need for something that sounds fancy and is all twisty and turny, and you're reading it going, what are they actually trying to say? Maybe they're right. This sounds like the most ridiculously complicated thing ever. Maybe I'm just too stupid to understand it. We need something that doesn't have intercalation in. We need a calendar that gives us 365.2422 days every year. Exactly that. No more, no less. You could have it out to 1 billion decimal points, 0.1, and it would still be wrong. You need something that gives you exactly that long as a year, because that's how long a year is. So the calendar has to reflect how long a year is. So what determines a chodesh? This is the big question. In the year, we've got these things called chodeshim, which is the plural of a chodesh. And in English, the closest word that we've got to it is month. Okay? It's fine for us to use the word month to refer to a chodesh, because it's the English word for that. So what determines a month? Well, a month, people will say, is determined by the moon. There's a problem with that. A lunar month is 29.53 days. 29.53 times 12 is 354.36, hence the need to intercalate the 13th month. Using the moon to determine the chodeshim means we have to create a 13th month without scriptural instruction as to how to do it, and without a 13th month ever being mentioned in scripture, especially in the book of Ezekiel. The sun, the moon, and the stars were given to us for the reckoning of time, and we've ruled out the moon. Okay, the new moon, giving us a month, That's not something that can be, because it doesn't give us 365.2422 days. If it did, that would be great. It doesn't. We're left with the sun and the stars. With the sun and the stars divide up the year perfectly into 12. Okay? Only the sun's position as it travels on its circuit through the stars gives us 12 distinct periods that you can look at the sun, moon, and stars and say, well, where are we at? Okay, this divides it up into 12. They're perfectly comprised of 1 year. The movement of the sun through the constellations, in fact, is intrinsic to the concept of a year. In other words, a year is how long it takes the sun to move through the 12 constellations. Every year, that's a year. So what do we use to determine the year and divide it into 12? We use the constellations. Now, people have a problem with using the constellations. They've got all of these associations with the zodiac. All the zodiac is people coming along and looking at these ancient systems of knowledge and ascribing their own meaning to it. If you're born in this Chodesh, then it means this. If you go back and look at ancient cultures, it's amazing their understanding of the stars. The Hebrews had something that they called the Ma'atzerot, and that was the 12 constellations. But every ancient culture had their understanding of these 12 constellations. And not only that, but the 12 constellations have all got these things called deacons, okay, which are other constellations nearby to these main constellations. And the amazing thing about that is every single one of those cultures has the same story attached to the meaning of the deacons and the meaning of the constellations. Even though if you look at the constellations, you might just see a squiggle in the sky. You think, well, if they were coming to their understanding of what they meant, how would they all come to the same story? And the story that they all come to is the story of Yeshua. The story is of a price that could not be paid, and then someone coming along and paying the price. That's one of the stories of one of the constellations anyway, and all of them tell the story of redemption. And all of these ancient cultures had these same stories, okay? And the Hebrews, which would be the root source of this, had the Ma'atzeroth. And it's always these 12 constellations. So if we want something that makes exactly a year, we use the Ma'atzeroth or the constellations. And that will not require any intercalation ever, because it's impossible for the sun to take any longer, because it's going on a circuit through those 12 things. You can't take it any longer on a circuit through a fixed thing, because then you've just gone into the first one again. Isaiah 47:13 links the stars with the Chodeshim directly. It says, you are exhausted by your many counsels. Let the astrologers, the stargazers, and those who prognosticate by the Chodeshim. Okay, the astrologers and the stargazers, what are they doing? They're prognosticating by the stars. Stars, stars, stars. Okay, let them stand up and save you from what is coming upon you. 2 Kings 23:4-5 says, then the king commanded Hilkiyahu the high priest and the priests of the second order and the doorkeepers to bring out of the temple of Yehovah all the objects that were made for Baal and for Asherah and for all the host of the heavens. And he burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and they took their ashes to Bethel. This is exactly what Charlie was talking about last week with the Baal and the Ashtaroth worship that was happening in order to worship Yehovah. And he put down the black-robed priests whom the kings of Yehudah had appointed to burn incense on the high places in the cities of Yehudah and in the places all around Jerusalem. And those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun, to the moon, and to the Mazalah. And this word Mazalah is related in Hebrew to the word Mazarot. Okay, it's the constellations. In fact, in the Septuagint version, they don't try to translate Mazarot, and they don't try to translate Mazalah. What they do is they put in a transliteration, which is in Greek, what the Hebrew sounds like, of Matzarot. It just says Matzarot in both places in the Septuagint. Okay, so if we look at the entry in Gesenius's Hebrew Chaldee lexicon for what this means, we'll see that this understanding that the sun in each of the months was in a different constellation is right there. Okay, and this is his Hebrew Chaldee lexicon. He says that the word means lodging places or inns. The Hebrews gave this name to the 12 signs of the zodiac, called in Arabic the circle of palaces. These were imagined to be lodging places of the sun during the 12 months. So they had this understanding. And in fact, our best understanding of what the stars, the story that the stars tell us, doesn't come from Hebrew, because we've lost the Hebrew names for the Matzaroth. It comes from Arabic, which is very closely related to Hebrew. And in Arabic, it tells the exact story of Yeshua. I've had the book recommended to me a number of times since the last calendar teaching, called E.W. Bullinger's The Witness of the Stars. It's not something I've had any time to look at in detail, but when I did the search for Mazzaroth, I came up with a Chuck Missler video where he was talking about the Mazzaroth, and he goes into all of these things. He goes into E.W. Bullinger and the Arabic, and it's quite an interesting little short video to watch. But all of these ancient cultures have these names and this exact same story, and it comes from a root. And the Hebrews had this understanding, and their understanding was that the sun lodged in each one of the constellations during each one of the 12 months, that they are essentially the Chodeshim, or that they dictate the Chodeshim. And that's right there for you if you want to go look on Blue Letter Bible, 2 Kings 23 verse 5. You're looking for this word translated as constellations, or mazalah, and that is the understanding that the Hebrews had. This calendar, which is on the floor of a 6th century synagogue, I said last time when I brought it up, I said I've not had time to translate all of these, but Ashley translated them, and they mean the same things as every culture has the understanding of. They're all pretty much the same. Like this one, I believe, is Archer. And we'll see Philo when he refers to these things. He talks about the constellation of the ram. And when you look at these constellations, they don't necessarily look like what people have understood them as. But again, these are Matzerot. These are in line with the understandings that we can see and understand the meaning of in Arabic. Psalm 19, 1-6 says, the heavens are proclaiming the esteem of Ale, and the firmament is declaring the work of his hand. This word proclaiming here, safar, what it means is to recount. Like if you recounted an account of something to somebody, it's saying that they're recounting his esteem or his glory. The firmament is declaring the work of his hand, and that's exactly what they do. They tell us this story of redemption. Day to day pours forth speech, night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, there are no words, their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and that means a measuring line. And their words to the end of the world. In them, he sets up a tent for the sun. Okay? It's this circuit for the sun, as it will call it in a second. And it is like a bridegroom coming out of its room. It rejoices like a strong man to run the path through the 12 constellations. Its going forth is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the other end, and naught is hidden from its heat. This word circuit, this is something that people kind of get caught up on. They say that it means equinox, because they read things like at the turning of the year. And we understand in English the turning of the year to be the equinox. It's when, you start to get lighter or darker days, basically. So we understand it as a turning of the year. But what it actually means is a turning on a circuit. And I went through that in the video last time, if people want more details. But this does not mean equinox. It wouldn't even matter if it did mean equinox, but just to make the point, it's turning on a circuit. It's revolving like that. It's not turning from one thing to another. It cannot mean that. So this is the video for anyone who's watching online. If you've not seen like the in-depth explanation which goes into the moon and how that fits into all of these things, goes into the equinox in detail, goes into more about the Chodeshim and more scriptures, I would recommend that people watch this. I've had people write emails and they say, it was only on the 4th or 5th time that we watched this that it clicked and we got it. Because when I received this information, it was it was in response to prayer, to questions that I had. So I understood how these chunks all fitted in as I was given them. But the first time that you hear something like this, you're like, well, okay, now that I've heard it once, maybe the chunks will fit in better the next time that I hear it, and then maybe the next time. So I'd recommend that people watch this if it's not making sense. Okay, the equinox then. People have asked, why is the equinox after the beginning of the first Chodesh? Because people have in their heads that the equinox is the beginning of the year. The equinox does not mark the beginning of anything, and using it to begin the year is not found in Scripture. You'll never find an instruction in the Scriptures that tells you to begin the year at the equinox. And it doesn't mark the beginning of anything. Okay, if you think it marks the beginning of the year, it should mark the beginning of 12 somethings. People have suggested that maybe we take the year and we divide it up equally into 12 starting at the equinox. But again, that's not scriptural. It's like a guess. It's like saying the calendar doesn't work if you start with the equinox. What should we do? We'll arbitrarily cut this 365 point whatever year up into bits. What we should have is the beginning of the year being followed by 12 periods that return back to the beginning, which is what you get if you start with the sun entering into a Chodesh. And we'll get into how we know which Chodesh as we go on. If you use the equinox to mark the beginning of the year, then what do you count to? Okay, you can't use simultaneously the stars and the equinox, which is what someone said to me. They said, well, it's pretty obvious. There's 2 equinoxes in a year, and there's 2 seasons of festivals. Okay, I'm not sure I'm following with you there. And they said, well, I was tracking with you while you were using the stars for the Chodesh, but you're not starting it with the equinox. You can't start it with the equinox because the equinox moves through the Chodesh. It moves one day approximately every generation. So every generation, the equinox would be a day before. And it continues like that. It's called the precession of the equinox. So at one point, it would have started the correct Chodesh. But at no point in Scripture are we told to use the equinox to mark the beginning of the year. The equinox has a very important function, which I'll get onto. And it is something that points us to feast times. People have become fascinated with the idea that the most simple of men could keep track of time using just a stick. But that's not scriptural. Using a stick to find the equinox is not scriptural. You never find that instruction anywhere. And people have become fascinated more with the idea that it's got to be something that could be done by the most simple of men. But that's, it's kind of like a romantic notion, but it's not actually true. Okay? If you think about the situation that the Israelites were in, living in Israel, when they wanted to know something from the Scriptures, they went to the Levites. Nobody had their own copy of the Scriptures. There was nobody sitting at home going, that's the calendar then. That was not a thing. So the idea that they could find then the equinox with the stick and they'd know where to go from there, it's not actually the reality of what would have been happening in Israel at the time. They would go to the Levites, and the Levites would guide them in the feasts and all of those sort of things. Doing it with a stick is not scriptural either. If you introduce some kind of technology to find out the calendar, then that's not correct. Okay, you can use technology like we can use it to know when the sun's entering into the Chodesh, but if that is your means of determining it, and it's not the sun, moon, and the stars, then it means that that's wrong. And a stick is a piece of technology when you use it in that way. Psalm 104 verse 19 says, he made the moon for appointed times. And when I first did the calendar video saying it's to do with the constellations, people sent me this verse, rightfully, the really good verse. The moon is for the Moedim. So what we need to know is, how is the moon for the Moedim? Because we know it can't be for the division of time. So how do we use the moon for the Moedim? But the bit of it that people don't reckon with is the moon he made for appointed times. The sun knows it's going down. You just kind of read that and go, oh, we don't know what that means. Probably not important. Very important. He made the moon for appointed times. The sun knows it's going down. And the reason that this is important is to show us how, or an artifact of the fact that you can find out when the equinox is without using a stick. You can know the day of the equinox simply by looking at the movements of the heavenly bodies. This is stellarium. Okay, this is the sun here. And what we're going to see is the sun is going to come down, and it's going to go down above this bush. Little bushes here, big bush here, this middle bush. I'll just play it so you can see this bit of it anyway. Okay. You can download this piece of software and you can use it. It's free. And then you can use this to track the heavenly bodies. Okay, so the sun goes down. Now what you're going to see, and you've got to remember when you're looking at this and when you see the other examples, when the sun's in the sky, you see it's got like a nighttime background to it here, so you can see the constellations. But when the sun's in the sky, you can't actually see the constellations. That'll be important. We see the sun going down here, and as it continues with the day, what we're going to see is the moon come overhead, and the moon is going to go down in exactly the same place. During this time of the day, when the moon's in the sky, you will be able to see the constellations. Okay, so here it is. And the moon will follow the exact same path across the sky on the day of the equinox alone as the sun did. Okay, and what we're expecting is for it to go down behind this bush here. And there you go. That's how you know the day of the equinox, when that happens. You don't need a stick or anything. See, the equinox is important, but it doesn't mark the beginning of anything. I'll show you why the equinox is important. Okay, when I first looked at the dates of the horoscopes, if you remember when I first did that first video, I said that I've been looking into this, and then when I looked at the dates of the horoscopes, I was like, the equinox is the first thing, and then all of the dates follow on from it. And then the same with the autumnal equinox. Problem is, as I said, that's not true. That's true on the horoscope reckoning of times, but it's not true on an astronomical reckoning of time. When we look at the sky, it's no longer true. The equinox moves throughout the constellations. And this is what Philo says. It says, the sun too, the great lord of the day, bringing about 2 equinoxes each year, in spring and autumn. And we looked last time at how there is no spring and autumn. There's the hot part of the year and the cold part of the year, and they're punctuated by harvests and the planting of seeds and the former rains and the latter rains and all of those sort of things are how they reckon their calendar. Okay, the spring equinox in the constellation of the Ram. Again, they all have these similar names. And the autumn equinox in that of the scales. We call it Libra, but we recognize that it is scales. Supplies very clear evidence of the sacred dignity of the 7th number. And basically what he's saying is that they're 7 months apart from each other. The first month, you've got 6 months, and then the next one's the 7th month, and then that cycle repeats. He says, and during them, there is enjoined by law the keeping of the greatest national festivals, since at both of them all the fruits of the earth ripen. This is the key. Why is he saying that the festivals are at that time of year? He says because that's when the fruits of the earth ripen. And that's the important thing, because we're told, YHVH said to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf, the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. So the Feast of First Fruits has to happen after the crops are ripe. Okay, and in fact, if we think about it, not only after the crops are ripe, but after they've harvested their crops and gone up to Jerusalem with the crops. Maybe it's the crops local to Jerusalem, we're not actually sure. The point being, the crops have to be ripe. So the function of the equinox, or the significance that we can see of the equinox, is that it tells us when things are going to be ripe. It doesn't mark the beginning of the year. You're not going to find it in Scripture as start the year from here, but it does tell you the time of the year that things are going to be ripe. In Leviticus 23:39, on the 15th day of the 7th Chodesh, when you gather in the fruit of the land. So again, they're having a harvest here. What this is telling us is the fruit of the land has to be ripe at this time. So this has to be after the equinox. It has to be after the equinox. Not because the equinox is told to us to be significant, but because we know that it's from that point that the crops get ripe. That's just what the equinox shows us. So nothing starts with the equinox, but we do know that the crops get ripe by it. Here's Josephus. Upon the 15th day of the same month, when the season of the year is changing for winter, in other words, when it's changing for the cold time. When does the season of the year change for winter? After the equinox. So which is the first Chodesh? If we know that the equinox shows us when the crops get ripe, how are we actually determining what is the first Chodesh? Which Chodesh begins the year? Since the equinox moves through the constellations, how do we know which constellation to begin with? This is one of the very excellent questions that was sent in. Calendars using lunar months generally start the year on the next new moon after the equinox. Okay, so you wait for the equinox, then it's the next new moon. None of that is scriptural, incidentally. If you start with the next constellation, however, the crops might ripen and be ready for the harvest in the Chodesh before. So to show you that visually, okay, let's just pretend that each one of these are the days of the Chodesh and not the days of these pagan name months. If the equinox is here, okay, the Chodesh started here, the next Chodesh starts here. If the crops ripen here, then you're going to have all of this time, and then 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 days until you're presenting the first fruits of the harvest, and you're not allowed to eat of the harvest until you've presented the first fruits. So this presents a problem. This is something that we need to reckon. This Chodesh, this year, the equinox did start very early in the Chodesh. So what I can give to you is the system by which this works. The 12 Chodesh, okay, the 12 constellations. But as to whether we're to wait for this one, all I can say to you is, it's not found in Scripture. You'll never find that instruction anywhere. All you'll actually find is, you need to wait until the crops are ripe, which is exactly what we're doing. Okay? I can show you the calendar, show you how it's meant to work. The actual implementation of the calendar, though, all I can tell you is, if we did wait for this, it wouldn't be from Scripture, and it wouldn't produce the right result. So, to me, that's not correct. To me, this is the Chodesh. If the equinox is here, and the equinox only points us to when things get ripe, this is the correct Chodesh, because this is when it ripens, and then you have first fruits kind of around here. Okay, if that makes sense. Okay, if the equinox was here, and then the Chodesh started here, the ripening might be here. But that doesn't mean that waiting for the next Chodesh is right. It only works in that case. If it's here, Chodesh starts here, the next one there, ripens here, it's not going to produce the right result. That makes sense now that you can see it visually, and it's not just something that exists in my own head. So how to know when a Chodesh starts? Okay, because if we're going to say it's when the sun enters into a constellation, how do we actually know when the sun enters into a constellation? So how to know? In the age of the internet and instant access to information, we've become accustomed to having the ability to immediately orientate ourselves and our knowledge of a matter. Okay, that's just what we're used to, isn't it? And they're people's expectations that we should be able to go, what's the situation? Look out the window. Oh, there it is. It's in that Chodesh. Well, that's not how things worked in the ancient world. Praise Yehovah that we can actually use the technology that we've got to know precisely when the sun enters into a Chodesh. Our understanding accords with the understanding of the ancients. In our modern society, we've lost touch with the movements of heavenly bodies. They lived outside. They would have seen the sun rise in the morning, which we're going to see why that's significant, and they would have seen the sun set, and they would be familiar with how everything was moving above them. They wouldn't have the pollution of the city lights, the light pollution, and they would have been able to see all these things. And if you can imagine day after day after day, you'd see these things very gradually happening in the skies, and you'd know exactly what was happening. We don't have that. We have the internet, though, so we can say, okay, this time, that's when the sun enters the Chodesh. We can rely on that, and it's the same information that they had in the past that they reckoned by very difficult means. And I'm in total agreement that it would be better for us if we did familiarize ourselves with the movement of the heavenly bodies, but we don't actually have to at the moment. We can know precisely when it happens. The ancients knew these things very precisely, and we now have the task of reacquainting ourselves with their methods. What I would suggest to people is that you watch the movement of the heavenly bodies. We know what they're there to tell us. Let's look at them and see these things, so that maybe if we're ever stuck out in the wilderness, we can track time. For us, though, we've got the internet. It accords with the ancients' knowledge. We can find out exactly when it happens, down to the second. So praise Yehovah for that. In the time that he knew that we weren't going to be following the stars anymore, he's given us the perfect tool to know. Okay, so this is why sunrise and sunset are important, to know where the sun is in the constellations. Like I said, if you look at the sky in the daytime, you can see the sun, but you can't see the constellations. If you look at the sky in the nighttime, you can see the constellations, but you can't see the sun. So how do you know? Well, again, I recommend people download Stellarium, and you can actually watch how these things take place. You can get a much better reckoning of the sky, and then maybe go out and start looking at what's actually happening. Okay, so this is just before sunrise. Oh, and here, what do we see? This is the constellation Pisces. This is just before the sun comes up. Pisces would travel across the sky. Then we would have the sun come up, and when the sun comes up, we can't see the constellation. So what we have to do once the sun has come up, and this is on its transit between Pisces and Aries, once the sun has come up, we need to wait for the sun to go down, and we need to see how the sun has changed position, or how the constellations have changed, and exactly where they are. And then when you track that over time, you can see the movement of these constellations, and you can know precisely when these things happen. Okay, so now this is sunset. At this point, you're still not able to see the constellations. You wouldn't be able to see that it's coming out of Pisces, but you would know that you'd seen Pisces before it came up, immediately before. And then when the sun had set, you'd be able to see Aries here. Okay, so if you're tracking that day by day, then it makes perfect sense. If you've got this kind of modern day understanding of things of, oh, we must have this information right now. Tell me, where is the sun? What constellation is the sun in? We must be able to find out immediately. Then we've got the tool to do that, but you can't do it just by looking at the sky. To do that, you need to be tracking it day and night over periods of time. They would have been doing it year in, year out. Here is the transit into the 7th Chodesh, okay, just before the sun comes up. Leo, that's the constellation at the moment. The sun comes up. You won't be able to see the constellations anymore. Now you have to wait until the nighttime. We can see that it's going into Virgo, but you won't be able to see that. Okay, so you wait for the nighttime, sun's coming down, and then once it's down, you can see what part of the constellation is visible. And this is like a moving picture that you would get every night. It's gradual movement, and over time, over days, over years, the picture would build in your head and you'd understand it intimately. It's a problem. It is a problem that we don't have that understanding. We can get it if people can be bothered. Get up in the morning, go to the sunset, see what constellation's visible. Go to a place where there's no light pollution and find out. That's how it worked for them. That's how we would have to do it. But as I say, for all of that is a bit too much trouble. Get your phone out and you can find out precisely. First Samuel 20 verse 5 shows us that they knew these movements intimately. David said to Jonathan, see, tomorrow is the Chodesh. Once you know the Chodesh, you know the length of time that it takes for the sun to travel through a constellation. You've been doing it for a couple of years. Then you know you can project the calendar out an awful long way. It's not just to the next day. But you know the length that these Chodeshim take. So, it's the first of the Chodesh now. So this Chodesh takes this long, and then we can know when this one's going to be. You could project it out and know the feasts months and months in advance. And of course, we can see by this, they did know the precise time that this happened. This is another way that you can know what the Chodesh is. For people who have seen this, everyone here has seen it, I think. This was included at the end of one of the parts of a Torah portion that went out on a live stream, but it never got put into the video. So we know that the sun is in a Chodesh, but the moon also travels through the Chodeshim, but it takes a much shorter amount of time to transit from one to another, about 2 or 3 days. Along the bottom, this color-coded bar here, each one of these different colors is the Chodesh that the sun is in. Okay? So for each one of these bars, the sun's in that Chodesh. You see this wavy line going up and down? You see that from that distance? That's the moon. Okay? That is full moon to new moon. Okay, you track the movement of the moon. From full moon to new moon, on the date of the new moon, see all the color-coded bars? They correspond to these Chodeshim as well. So when the sun is in this Chodeshim, on the new moon, the moon will be in the Chodeshim as well. So you can't see the sun and what constellation the sun's in during the night, but you can see the moon during the night, and you can see the constellations during the night. So this is like a second witness as to which Chodeshim you're at any point in time. You just wait for the new moon and look at what constellation the moon's in, and you know that's what the Chodesh is currently. But as I say, they'd be tracking these things over much greater periods of time, and they would know these things intimately, as we can see evidence that they did. Come back in the third part and actually get into the feasts, because they should make more sense now. When I'm saying things like the first Chodesh and the seventh Chodesh, now you know what that is and how it's dictated. But, and if people were watching at the beginning of the live stream, they'll be aware, because there's just so many questions about this, and because it's such a crazy subject matter, I want to give the opportunity for people online to ask any questions that they've got. So if you're watching it and you're on YouTube, you go over, watch it on YouTube, and you refresh your browser, you press the little circle with the arrow on at the top of your browser, you refresh that, then the live chat will pop up. We don't usually have live chat on because, in my experience, when people have like an open chat forum and the Torah keepers, all of these sort of craziness aspects all come into it, and everyone's just talking to each other instead of listening to the video, and they're teaching each other nonsense, and it's never been a good thing in my experience. So we don't have the live chat on. But if people refresh now, the live chat will appear, and you can ask questions. And Ashley's in the back room, and she will tell me if there's any questions, and then I'll do my best to answer them. We'll see where we're at. No questions yet? Okay, I'll give it 20 seconds so that we're not just sitting here. Hopefully nobody's got any questions. That would be brilliant, wouldn't it? I don't think anyone's going to ask any questions. They'll be ready to fire off the questions. What's that, sorry? Time lapse, that's true. Yeah. Okay. We'll wait until it's until it displays on your phone then, and then we'll. What's the question? Is the location of what? Yeah, I get the question. Okay, so if you're in a different place in the world, it's going to work differently than if you're in Israel, and that is another one of the great things about this calendar. It works anywhere in the world. In fact, any of the calendars will work anywhere in the world, because you reckon the time by the sun, the moon, and the stars. They look different in different areas, but time is different in those places. You know, in some places it's going to be daytime, in some places it's going to be nighttime. We don't say, is it day or night in Israel? Because we must reckon day or night by Israeli time. It's got no relevance to us. We can reckon the time wherever we are in the world. Do we have any more? Okay, so when you're looking online, the dates that you'll find for when the sun enters into the constellations, you've got to make sure that you're using an astronomical website. The astrological dates are all vastly different, and they've never actually changed. But as to when the sun's going to enter into a constellation, look up astronomy as the Google term that you search with. Or just use our calendar on thewaybiblicalfellowship.com. Yeah. Well, all I can say is the ancients were all in agreement over it. They were very precise in their understanding. I don't have this astronomical understanding. But if you were tracking these things moving through the sky, the middle point of them is actually something that is discernible. They were all in agreement over it, so we can either look to their understanding of when those things happen, or we can look to the actual mathematical precise when does it actually transit from one to the other exactly, and that actually agrees with what they knew as well. So all a bit mysterious how they knew it, but we do know what they knew, so we can reliably, I would say, go off that. Good question. If the equinox is in the middle of the Chodesh, they would have been intimately familiar with how long crops took to ripen. I went through the moon as well in the teaching, and the significance of things like the barley moon and the harvest moon. They would tell them when the harvests were going to be. So all of that ancient understanding that surrounds it is important for us to reacquaint ourselves with. What I do know is this is the system by which we do it. And I also know that it's going to be a long, long time until the equinox is in the middle of the Chodesh, so it's not going to be a problem for us. But it's a good question. These are questions that I have as well.
Is your calendar based on Jerusalem?
I don't really understand the question. I don't know what the Jerusalem location is. Unless it's asking the same thing about do we reckon it by Jerusalem time and what's going on in Jerusalem. But again, the same example, we don't reckon day and night off what day and night, whether it's day and night in Jerusalem. We don't reckon our dates off what date it is in Jerusalem. We've got our own systems of time, and it changes around the world. The movements of the heavenly bodies are different around the world, so that we can use that system in those various places. Maybe I've misunderstood the question. If you want to explain what Jerusalem location is, then I'll have another stab.
Okay, someone
Where in the scriptures would they go so that they could see the information? The seasons and the times correctly. What we're going to go over in the third part, Leviticus 23, there's also Deuteronomy 16, Exodus 34, Exodus 12, specifically for the Passover and unleavened bread. They go to the Torah commandments about the feasts and what the times were. But like I say, nobody had their own copy of the scriptures. If they wanted to know this information, they would have gone to the priests to find out, or they would have gone to their local Levite and they would have found out what that information was. The idea that they would have had to have been able to determine these things from the scriptures is based on a false premise, that false premise being that they would have had the scriptures.
Why were the lengths or the duration of the regime so different this year?
Different to what they were last year. Last year we were going off the astrological dates. That was before understanding the reckoning of the equinox and all of those things. That was back when I thought that the equinox started the Chodeshim. I think that's what the difference that they're talking about is. The length of the Chodeshim should always be the same, though. Just when you start the Chodeshim is different with the astrological dates to the actual observed astronomical ones. For a generation, someone asked, are the dates for the feast days the same for every year? For a generation, they would be, for at least a generation actually, until the equinox moved to such a point where the crops were going to ripen in a different Chodesh. So for a long time, yes, they are. But eventually it would change when the crops ripened in a different Chodeshim. I think that's just more of a scriptural question. If you write me an email at lightin_the_dark@hotmail.com, I'll answer your question. But if we just stick to calendar questions so that it doesn't just go on forever. I believe it was, yeah. I was kind of following Nehemiah Gordon and Michael Rood, what they were doing, and I believe it was. But we can find out all this information and check out these things and see what would have been the correct dates. But yes, it's the last one. Okay, cool. We'll come back in the third part. We'll cover the feasts for anybody who's new to this, and we'll look at things like the Sabbath and what's actually been asked of us on the Sabbath for people who've been doing it for a while. Okay, then in this part, we're going to look at the chapter that we skipped. We're going to look at Leviticus 23. This is a really, really important chapter for anybody who is even remotely new to following the Torah, because you know that you're to keep the feasts, but what you actually do on the feasts, how do you keep them? And they're important because they are holy things. They're part of Yehovah's holy. So it says, and Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed times of Yehovah you are to proclaim as set apart gatherings. My appointed times are these. And it's worth pointing out that Yehovah says that they're his appointed times. They're things that are holy to him, and he has chosen to share them with all of us. So we actually get to take part and be a part of something that is holy, not just as the body, the physical holy things, but things that are holy in time as well. But they're Yehovah's appointed times. People have all sorts of associations with the feasts. They're to do with the Jews, or they're the the worldwide church of God, they're the ones who do the feasts or whatever, but they're not. The YHVH's feasts, and we're just coming back to honoring him through them. The instruction that it gives, it says that we're to proclaim them as set-apart gatherings. Now, this is an instruction in the Torah, but has anyone ever thought about what it is to proclaim as a set-apart gathering, what that actually means? What are we supposed to be doing? This is the fundamental basis of keeping the feasts. We are to kara as set-apart gatherings, as kodesh mikra. Now, if you remember, the word for making something holy or sanctifying something is to kadash it. Okay, and we know that the set-apart place, for want of a better word, is called the mikdash, and that comes from the mi and then like a shortened kadash. Very simple terms to think of this in. Okay, this is the verb to kara as opposed to kadash. These are set apart mi kara. Okay, so this is to do with the verb kara. So when you kara these set apart mi kara, in order to do that, we need to understand what it is to kara. Okay, so here's kara, it's a verb, and it means to summon, invite, call for, call and commission, appoint, call and endow. Well, that's how it's used in the scriptures anyway. When you see this on Blue Letter Bible, they're just telling you how the scriptures use it to their understanding. But it's a pretty good definition, which is why I point it out. Okay, to summon or invite or call for. So what you're doing is you're calling these things. You're summoning, you're inviting his people to a set apart mikra, and mikra is from the verb to kara. What it is a convocation, convoking, reading, a calling together. I want you to notice something here. It calls it a reading. That's not actually entirely correct. You can use this word to mean a reading. Like if I use the word meeting, okay? What it would be a meeting, but you could use that meeting to do a reading. So some places in scripture, the word mikra is used, and it's a word for a meeting, but because of the context of what's going on, they use the word reading. And this is important because we see what the Strong's definition is. It says rehearsal here, and this is something that people get caught up on. These things are rehearsals. When I did this Torah portion last year, I went through, and the point of the Torah portion last year was that these things are not just rehearsals. Well, they're not rehearsals. They're fulfillments of the feast every time we do it. And when I went through prophecy and I pointed out these thematic feast motifs throughout scripture in all of the prophecy, I wasn't trying to tell you how the future of the world is going to definitely go. What I was trying to point out to you is that these feasts happen over and over and over again, and each time it's a fulfillment of it. When we do the feast, we're fulfilling the feast again. That's not how prophecy works, that there's a prophecy and then a fulfillment. Prophecy is fulfilled over and over and over again, and when we do the feast, we're doing that. We're not just rehearsing for some one definite future point. So when it calls it a rehearsal, just like when it calls it a reading here, what it is in its wider sense is a calling together or a meeting of his people. And it could be a reading, it could be a rehearsal, but what it actually is a meeting. Okay, so that makes sense. You see in Nehemiah 8:8 it says, and they karad in the book of the Torah of Elohim, giving insight and causing them to understand the mikra. Okay, the mikra, the calling out, the meeting that they were having. Okay, but it says reading because that's what they were doing. They were reading the book of the Torah. But again, if we look at the Hebrew behind it, we can kind of see a little bit more of what they were doing. It's why it's important for us to understand the Hebrew concept rather than the English word that's used in its place. YHVH spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Yisrael and say to them, the Moedi. I don't know why we call them Moedim. Maybe it's another word that I'm unfamiliar with in another passage of scripture, but when YHVH refers to them in Hebrew, they're his Moedi. That's the plural, which are to call as set apart callings together. So all of his feasts, when they are Kodesh Mikra, we are to call, we're to summon, we're to invite as a body, and all be called out and called together. So it's important that we meet on these feast days. That is the basis of the instruction of what we're being called to do, to call people to be called out as a meeting on his Moedi. My Moedi are these. One of his Moedi is the Shabbat. Okay, so 6 days work is done, and the word there for work is milakah. I'll get into milakah a little bit as we go on. Is done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest. What it actually says in the Hebrew is a Shabbat Shabbaton. There's two different concepts that we need to be familiar with as we're going through this. There's a Shabbat, and that is just a name. This is the thing which is going on. What we do on Shabbat is we Shabbaton, we rest. So in the Hebrews it says it is a Shabbat Shabbaton, a Kodesh Mikra. You do no work. And the Hebrew says, Kal Milakah lo ta'asu. Kal means any. Milakah means work. Lo means thou shalt not. Okay? Lo ritzach, whatever the word for murder was. Thou shalt not murder. Okay? So any or all work, thou shalt not. And then we're familiar with the verb to asa. Okay, to do. And this is just a modified version of the verb. It's nothing fancy or complicated. So any work you shall not do is literally what it says. Why? It's a Shabbat to Yehovah in all your dwellings. And this kind of going to be important as we go on, because people like to divide up the different Sabbaths, and they say you can't do different types of work on the different types of Sabbaths. What I'm going to show you is you can't do any work on any kind of Sabbath. So this is the word milakah. Okay, I had a conversation with somebody recently, a guy called Zach Lang, who I met at the conference when we went over. When I came back, I said I'd have this conversation that we never got to have at the conference. And what he was suggesting is that the milakah is just limited to this that you find in the Strong's definition, your occupation. Okay, basically, so it's telling you not to do your occupation. And if you plug that word in to the scriptures and think occupation as we're going through this, I don't think it makes sense in those contexts. But that really doesn't matter. My point in doing this is not to say my position on this was right. What I settled on with him is I said, look, you can define it very narrowly if you want to, but knowing that the possibility is that it's broader in scope, which I think personally I think it's clear that it is broader in scope, but that's irrelevant. Knowing that it could be broader in scope, to decide it could be broader in scope, but I'm going to narrow it down to this, isn't the way that we are to be. If you do anything doubting, then it is sin to you. We're to, if we think maybe this is not allowed and we do it anyway, then that's sin to us, basically. I think it's to do with this. I think if you look at the usages of it, it's to do with this. It's to do with industriousness. This is just how they understand it being used in the Bible. Industriousness, though. So anything that you're being industrious doing, like, for example, Ashley won't make tzitzit on Shabbat because she's being industrious in doing it. Now, maybe she's allowed to, maybe she's not, but she doesn't do it. Anything that is like that. And the conversation that we were actually having is to do with cooking, whether or not you could cook on a Shabbat. And he was saying that when it says that cooking is milakah, and he was saying the only cooking that you could do, you could only do milakah for what everyone had to eat. As he was saying that some people were employed as chefs, so it was saying that the chefs could do their occupation on that day. And I don't think if someone's cooking at home, they're doing their occupation anyway. But as I say, that debate aside, milakah is work, and this is the wide understanding that we can have of it. It's industriousness. Is there anything that you're occupying yourself with? Okay, being industrious. Because the Shabbat is a Shabbat Shabbaton. It's a Sabbath of rest. What we need to be doing on it is resting. We don't just look at one aspect of it and say, well, we're allowed to do this. And then, people get into all of this stuff about what is restful. And if I find working in the garden restful, is that me resting on the Sabbath? Basic point is, on the Sabbath, it is holy. And we have been looking at holiness for the whole book of Leviticus. I think that we can all understand what resting is, and in that rest, making it holy to Yehovah and not using it for any profane purpose, which is what we were looking at the beginning. In the Septuagint, it says, 6 days shalt thou do works, which is an interesting way of translating it. But on the seventh day is the Sabbaton, a rest. And the word there is not Shabbat Shabbaton, it's in Greek. It's a Sabbaton, anaposis. Anaposis is a word that we can then take and look at in the New Testament. And when we do that, we find some really, really interesting things. I thought that these were funny. I'm not suggesting for a second that this is definitely how to understand the scriptures. People call the Shabbat a burden, don't they? Okay, they say that it's bondage to follow the law, and the Shabbat a burden. Well, this is what Yeshua said. And remember, this word, anaposis, is the word that's used of the Sabbath rest, the rest that you have on the Sabbath. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble in heart, and you shall find anaposis for your souls. For my yoke is gentle and my burden is light. You follow Yeshua's yoke and his burden, you will find your Shabbat rest. Thought that was interesting. And for the people who say that the mark of the beast is going to be a Sunday Sabbath, again, this is just something I found funny when I was looking through this. The smoke of their torture goes up forever and ever. They have no anaposis, no Shabbat rest, day or night. Those worshipping the beast in his image. Also, if anyone receives the mark of his name. So they get no Sabbath rest if they follow the mark of the beast, even on Sunday. Weird word though, if you use it. If you look it up, it's only used like a very few handful of times, and they happen to be the ones that it's used. So these are the Moedi of Yehovah, and the Kodesh Mikra, which you kara at the appointed times. This is why we are called together on these days. In the first Chodesh, now that we understand what a Chodesh is, it's the first Chodesh is the one in which the crops get ripe. On the 14th day of the Chodesh, between the evenings is a Passover to Yehovah. So you have the going down of the sun, and that is the first, what Scripture would refer to as an evening. Then you've got darkness, or twilight as it's sometimes rendered, and that is the second evening. You eat the Passover between the evenings. Okay, so as the sun starts to go down, which is when we ate our Passover remembrance. Find it amazing that in Exodus 12, verse 14, it says, and this day has become to you a remembrance. It's the one feast that we can't do anymore, the one that we can only remember. It's this day. It says the Passover has become to you a remembrance. I think that's amazing. He's speaking in the future perfect tense as well. He says, look, this is what's happened. It became a remembrance. But that's an important point. Because when we're trying to do Passover, when people who are new to the Torah come to try and do Passover, they say, how do we do Passover? Where do we find that out? Wait there, if we go to Exodus 12, it's got a load of detailed instructions about how we do Passover. So we'll do these instructions as us doing Passover. But we can't do that. If people want to know in detail about that, about what we can do, what we can't do, what remembering it really is, and what happened with Yeshua, I suggest watching that. If people are interested in how we did Passover, how we made remembrance of Passover, and I think people, when we did this, were quite offended by the fact that it had elements of a Seder meal in it, even though it wasn't the Jewish Seder. It didn't have all of like the pagan stuff to do with that. It just had the good stuff that pointed to Yeshua in it. I think they were offended because the video got a number of dislikes. This is how we did it this year. This is the one that got the dislikes. So people can watch these things. But the reason that you need to disassociate yourselves from the instructions of Passover when we're keeping Passover, In Deuteronomy 16:5-6, it says, you're not allowed to slaughter the Passover within any of your gates which Yehovah your Elohim gives you. But at the place where Yehovah your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell, there you slaughter the Passover in the evening at the going down of the sun at the appointed time you came out of Mitzrayim. Okay, so you're not allowed to slaughter it at home. So you've got all of these people looking at the instructions of Exodus 12 and they're getting themselves a lamb. People who live on homesteads, for example, they get themselves a lamb and they say, this is the Passover sacrifice to Yehovah. And they kill the lamb and they follow all of the criteria and, they burn it so there's nothing left. And that's a problem because it's specifically sin for us to do that. And then what you'll get is people saying, you can do it in the place where he chooses to make his name dwell. Well, now I'm the temple of the Ruach. I am the place where he chooses to make his name dwell. Well, again, you've got to make your differentiation between physical, earthly, heavenly, and spiritual. If you're going to spiritualize the place where he makes his name dwell, you can't be doing the physical sacrifice there because those things just don't mesh. They don't work with each other. So we can't follow the instructions for Passover. It has become a remembrance to us. So all we do is remember it. If people want to come up with their own traditions, their own ways of remembering Passover, as long as it's not against the word of Elohim, that's fine. All we're doing is remembering the Passover. And if people want to pay homage to some of the commands by, eating bitter herbs or whatever to remember the commands, that's okay. The point at which it becomes crossing the line is when you're doing it to fulfill the commands as the Passover sacrifice in a place that is not Jerusalem. In the first Chodesh, on the 14th day of the Chodesh, between the evenings, it's Passover to Yehovah. So as I said, this is once the sun starts to go down before it's become dark, which we just saw in the verse in Deuteronomy, in the evening at the going down of the sun. So that's when you eat it. Exodus 12 verse 15 says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Okay? How many days are we going to eat unleavened bread? 7. In the first Chodesh, on the 14th day of the Chodesh, in the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the Chodesh. And it says literally in evening. It's like Bereshit is in beginning rather than in the beginning. The is implied. But in the evening, that's when the day begins. So from the 14th day, what did we just find out about the 14th day? Between the evenings, that's when the Passover is killed and eaten. Okay? You shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the Chodesh. So how much time is there between the evening of the 14th and the evening of the 21st? The 7 days. Okay? 7 days. And this is when the 7 days go from and they go to. And this is, I get people asking questions about, why don't you begin the day in the morning? It's so clear from Scripture that the day begins in the morning. Why do you begin in the evening? This is one of the primary things. If I just point somebody to something and say, look, this is why it has to be evening to evening, this would be the strongest piece of evidence. The other verses, they're all misunderstandings of logic or they're mistranslations. And the translator's doctrine comes into play. They think that the day goes from morning to, they've got their own reckoning of the days and they put that into their translation. What we're going to look at here proves that the days start in the evening and the days end in the evening. That should be clear just from this. This is when the day starts and this is when the days end. But some people learn better visually. So this is the 14th day. Okay? When does the 15th day, the first day of unleavened bread, when does that begin according to that instruction? In the evening of the 14th day. That's when it begins. Scripture is absolutely 100% clear on that. There's no kind of misunderstanding there. That's what it says. So this must be the 15th day. That makes sense to me. 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. When does the 21st day end? In the evening of the 21st. And guess what? You've got 7 days in between those two evenings. If you say that the 14th day began in the morning, when does the 15th day begin? Well, it begins on the evening of the 14th. Well, that's a huge, huge problem, isn't it? That would make the 15th day here, and that's an obvious nonsense. It should be an obvious nonsense to everyone, but let's just try and fudge around that. People like their intercalation and their fudging. Maybe this is the 14th day. Okay, if the 14th day began in the morning and it ends in the evening of the 14th day, that would be the only possibility, wouldn't it? That's the 14th day. So what's the 15th day? If it starts in the evening of the 14th, and then the days go until the morning, and then you've got the 16th day from the morning, that's the reckoning of days. Is that the 15th day? One of the only possibilities. The other possibility is that that is the 15th day, if we want to continue our cycle of days. Okay, let's say it's the 15th day from here, from the evening, and we have an entire day. And Scripture, as we've seen recently, defines a day as day and night. Day and night is a day. Day and night is a day. Okay, so if the 15th went until the morning and then the day started again, let's just entertain this bizarre possibility for a second. 16th day, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. When does the 21st day end? Ends in the evening of the 21st day. So if we were to follow this bizarre reasoning, is that the 21st day? Because that's the only way that it could work, isn't it? Otherwise it's impossible. Again, just like the intercalation, what this should be telling people is that the day starting in the morning doesn't work with the instructions of Scripture, and that they need to go back and re-examine those verses which they think imply that it does. Just for the sake of the example, let's say they were right with this. You'd have the 16th day starting from the morning to the morning, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. When does the 21st day end? In the evening of the 21st. So again, you're left with this, and this is even more bizarre. Does anyone actually think that this is how the days work? Okay, so from the 14th day, the evening of the 14th day, if, and I'm sure that somebody will suggest it, but if only for the period of 7 days you go evening to evening, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, evening of the 21st, that's 7 full days. I mean, that's, not forget that you've got to have this bizarro day here. Okay, that will give you 7 days. But then what do you do after those 7 days? Is that the 22nd day? Is the 22nd day the evening, and then the morning and the evening, and then we start days again? Doesn't make any sense. The whole thing doesn't make any sense. What this teaches us is that the days absolutely are evening until evening. It's the only way that actually works. It's the clearest example that we've got, along with the Day of Atonement. And to say, oh no, this is just an exception, evening to evening, doesn't even work out. It sounds like maybe it would work out, but it doesn't work out. So verse 6 of Leviticus 23 says, and on the 15th day of this Chodesh is the festival of unleavened bread to Yehovah. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. On the first day you have a set apart gathering. You do no servile work. And here we come across another thing that people who are new to the Torah, and even people who aren't and have been doing this, can be deceived by. You do no servile work. And in English, we've got an understanding of what it is to be servile. It's like to be someone's servant. It's like cleaning the toilets or something. That's what makes sense to us when it comes to servile work. Okay, maybe scrubbing the floor or something. Servile work. But what it says in the Hebrew is kal melacha, or melaka, all work or any work, avodah is the word, lo ta'asu, you do not do. So any work, avodah, we need to understand this word, you do not do. In Leviticus 23, 7-8, okay, it says, on the first day of unleavened bread. Okay, so we've had Passover on the 14th, the first day is the 15th. You have a set-apart gathering, and you do no servile work. Bring an offering made by fire. The seventh day is a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. So this is about the first and the seventh day of unleavened bread. You do no servile work on them. And what people are suggesting is that that's the only type of work that you can't do on these days. But if it's not servile, you're absolutely fine in doing it. Okay? They're saying it's different from the command, you do no work. And it's something that people have to be careful of, because we have a tendency within us to want to try and get around commandments if they're inconvenient for us. Okay, so this says, first seventh day you do no servile work. Problem is, in Deuteronomy 16 verse 8, it says on the seventh day of unleavened bread, you do no work. Kal melakah lo toasu. Okay, so if they were different, it's using the same thing for the two things. Also in Exodus 12:16, the first day is a set-apart gathering. No work at all is done on them. Kel melakah lo yayaseh. Same word, asa. You do no work on them, basically. So we are given specific instructions. No work at all. No servile work. They all mean the same thing. As in the Hebrew, no manner of work. There's this milakah word that we've been looking at. Here it is. This is kal. This is milakah. This is lo. This is ta'asu. Okay? So, kal milakah lo ta'asu. You do no work. Here's the Hebrew with servile work. Avodah, milakah. In the passage, kal, milakah, avodah, lo ta'asu. So what is that actually saying? Avodah, we might be familiar with, is service in some contexts. But the word avodah actually means work. Okay, it doesn't mean servile work when you combine it with milakah. If you went to Israel today and you spoke to somebody in Israel and they said that they were going to do some work, this is the word that they would use. It's just the general word for work. You've got all of these people coming to the Torah and discovering Hebrew for the first time. And I don't know, they're not even doing it with Hebrew, are they? They're doing it with the English rendering of the verse and trying to get around things. Okay, but it says here, work of any kind. It's this definition, work of any kind. So in the passage, we've got any work of any kind, you shall not do. So far from it saying only servile work you can't do, it actually emphatically makes clear any work of any kind you cannot do. That's the instruction that we're seeing. 6 days work is done, but the seventh day is a Shabbat Shabbaton. Kodesh Mikra, you do no work. Kal malakah lo ta'asu. It's a Shabbat. So on a Shabbat, and a Shabbat of rest, you do no work. Leviticus 23:24, speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the seventh Chodesh, on the first day of the Chodesh, you have a Shabbaton. That's a rest. A Shabbat is different. So what's this? This is the Feast of Trumpets. And saying this is a rest. Just calls it a rest here. Verse 31-32, you do no work. Kal melakah lo ta'asu. A chukah forever throughout your generations. In all your dwellings, it is a Shabbat Shabbaton. So you do no work, it's a Shabbat Shabbaton. We're seeing these things repeated. And when we see these concepts, it's not that we can divide them up. If we're careful in our study of them, we see that a Shabbat, a Shabbaton, you do no work, you do no servile work, are all exactly the same command, and they're actually used interchangeably. On the first day is a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. Kal melakah avodah lo ta'asu. Any work of any kind you do not do. For 7 days you bring an offering made by fire. On the 8th day there shall be set-apart gathering. And again, any work of any kind you do not do. So this is Sukkot. First day and the 8th day. Any work of any kind you do not do. It's a rest. We see that here in the next verse. It says on the first day is a Shabbaton, the 8th day is a Shabbaton. So what is a Shabbaton? What is a rest? Well, it's just told us in the verses before. Any work of any kind you do not do. That's what a rest is when you hear it is a rest, or it is a Sabbath of rest. So continuing, verse 8 says, and you shall draw near with an offering made by fire to YHVH for 7 days. On the 7th day is a set apart gathering. You do work of any kind you do not do. YHVH spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and you have said to them, when you come into the land which I give you and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf in the presence of YHVH for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Shabbat, the priest waves it. Amazingly, this is something that people struggle with again. What people struggle with here is we've just had verses that say the first and 7th day are rests or are Shabbats to YHVH. So when it comes to this, they say, well, maybe it's not talking about a weekly Shabbat. Maybe it's talking about the first day of unleavened bread. You have Passover on the first day, then on the 15th day is the Sabbath, and then on the day after the Sabbath, you have first fruits. And it kind of makes sense. Kind of makes sense what they're saying. But if we're careful in our examination of it, it doesn't make any sense. For a start, why doesn't it say on the 16th, have the Feast of First Fruits? It could easily say that. But I hate those sort of arguments of why didn't God say this in the Bible. So let's see what we can find. Remember this language, on the morrow after the Sabbath. What I'm saying is this Sabbath is the weekly Sabbath. So you've got Passover. Then after that, you've got the 7 days that you eat unleavened bread. It's an important command. Each of those days, we're told, you must eat unleavened bread on. So if people are new to keeping the feasts, keep your remembrance, you remember Passover, okay? Then for the next week, every day, you eat a bit of unleavened bread, bread that doesn't have any leaven in. Leaven causes things to rise. Yeshua was in the tomb, unrisen, during unleavened bread. You can see clearly what the pictures are, but it's very easy to follow these commands. Just every day, have a bit of bread that doesn't have any leaven in. And don't eat any products that do have leaven in. Really, really simple. During that 7-day period, since it's a 7-day period, it must have a weekly Sabbath in it. Any period of 7 has a weekly Sabbath in it. When that weekly Sabbath is, the day after it, you have what's called the Feast of First Fruits. And we'll look at what we're required to do on the Feast of First Fruits in a minute. In fact, we'll look at it now. And on that day, you wave the sheaf, you prepare a male lamb, a year old, a complete one, as an olah to YHVH. It is a mincha, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, and a shah to YHVH, a sweet fragrance, and its drink offering, 1/4 of a hin of wine. And you do not eat bread, lechem, or roasted grain, or fresh grain, until the same day you've brought your means of drawing near to YHVH by mincha, a chukah forever throughout your generations. And if people are eagle-eyed, they'll have noticed that these are all things that we cannot do, in a sense. What they were actually doing on the Feast of First Fruits is they were taking of their harvest that YHVH had given them, and they were offering to him the first of it. They were making this small offering, this one sheaf of barley that they would offer before him. That is the part of it which we can do. Just like with the tithe, when we have harvests and we can take of our increase and we tithe of it, it's equally as important that we're following these instructions. The thing that really struck me as I was going through Leviticus 23 is how easy it makes it to despise his word. How easy it makes it to lightly esteem the words that he asks us to do. Because there's things in here that I haven't done over the years when I started doing it, that I've started to do recently. And it just struck me that it was so easy to not do those things and to not pay attention to them because they seemed a little bit obscure or whatever. So for us, we can present first fruits of the harvest that he gives us. Maybe every time you get paid, you can take 50 pence. Take a pound out of it, 20 pence, whatever it is. It was a very small amount. And just put it aside as the first fruits of what he's given you. And then give it as an offering to him. And on the Feast of First Fruits this year, Charlie said to everyone, you need to be making an offering, a first fruits offering. It doesn't have to be much, just this very small amount. This is the place that he mentioned for anyone who's interested, because people, when they're giving a first fruits offering, they're to give it to the priests. They're not to give it to the Levites, to the teachers. They give it to the priests. The only way we can give it to a priest is to give it to Yeshua. Yeshua said, give to the least of the brethren. People like this qualify as the least of the brethren. Okay, this is an orphanage in Pakistan. It's funding for the orphanage. It doesn't actually exist. Their parents were killed in a bomb blast through persecution for their faith. Torah keepers, and their parents were all killed, and now they've got nowhere to live, and these people are looking after them. Not saying that you need to give a first fruits offering to these people. It was just a way to make it easy for people who wonder, well, how do I give to the orphans? How do I give to widows? You know, there's no one around me. I've been asked this question before. How do you actually do it? This is a great way to actually do it. But I would say to everyone to really examine yourselves and think on first fruits. When Charlie said you need to be given a first fruits offering, did you give that offering? I mean, maybe you did. I've got no idea. You could have gone out and helped a poor person or whatever it could be. But examine yourself and ask, did you actually do that? Was it important to you to do that? Or was it just easy to you to despise the word of Elohim? And there are a number of different things in Leviticus 23 which really strike me as it's so easy to despise his word through these things. But these again are tests of our heart, where we're actually at. Is it important? Did we really need to do that? This is another example. And from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 tamim Shabbatot. Okay, complete, perfect Sabbaths. Until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, you count 50 days, and you shall bring a new grain offering to Yehovah. Okay, so when do you do it too? The morrow after the 7th Sabbath. The morrow after the Sabbath, it's talking about the weekly Sabbath. How do I know? Well, the 7th Sabbath, there's no 7 high Sabbaths in between. This is obviously talking about the morrow after a weekly Sabbath. From the morrow after one Sabbath to the morrow after the 7th Sabbath. But we're to do this. After every Sabbath, when the Sabbath is complete, we are to count the Shabbat. So after the sun goes down today, 4th Shabbat, that's it. It's a Tamim Shabbat. We count that. We count each day as well. These are the things that it's very easy to despise Yehovah's word and just be like, I don't know what day it is of the Omer. It's not actually called counting of the Omer in Scripture, but that's how people refer to it. I don't know what day of the 50 I'm on. I've got no idea. We need to be very precise in our keeping of these things because they're important. And Yehovah delights in our obedience. And when we just cast these things off as not important, it speaks to him about where we're at. If I said to you, I want you to count 50 days, because on the 50th day, I'm going to give you £50,000. You'd do it, wouldn't you? There's no way that you wouldn't do it. Why? Because it would be important to you to do it. The reason that people don't do things like this is because it's not important to them. Yehovah said to do it, but it's just not important enough, and they don't do it. They don't remember. Draw near from your, come from your dwellings, rather, for a wave offering, 2 loaves of bread of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour. They are baked with leaven, first fruits to Yehovah. So after the Feast of First Fruits, you count 50 days until Shavuot, which was Pentecost. Pentecost meaning 50. So this is what people should be doing during this time. And when we reach the 50th day, we're going to bring a first fruits offering to Yehovah. So again, if you need to save a little bit out of every time you're paid, or whatever it is, bring some of your harvest to honor Yehovah. You can honor him in any way. I'm going to send money to that orphanage. That's what I'm going to do personally. But you can do it however you want. But make sure you do it, and that it's important. Besides the lechem, you shall draw near with 7 lambs a year old, tamim ones, and 1 young bull and 2 rams. And this is interesting because what we've been learning is that each one of these sacrifices makes atonement. Okay? So what was being done on every one of the feast days is atonement was being made for the children of Israel. So when you read, they brought 7 lambs or whatever, on each of those 7 days, or over unleavened bread, or over Sukkot, on each one of those days, when an atoning offering was brought, atoning was going to be made. And it's just like when we learned about the 8th day, Shmini, the Shmini day, Shmini Yom. Over 7 days, atonement was made for the priests. And then on the 8th day, all the people met together and Yehovah appeared in their midst. And it's very similar to what's happening at Sukkot. You've got the 7 days of Sukkot. On each day, a sacrifice has to be brought. And then on the 8th day, it's a set apart calling together. And we're to meet and be called out before Yehovah. These things have significance. I don't know what they were, but the people would have all been atoned for during all of these things. They are an olah to Yehovah with the mincha and the drink offerings, and an isha for a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. And you shall offer 1 male goat as a chata'at, and two male lambs as a zevach shlamim. So you've got the grain offering, the olah, the burnt offering, you've got the peace offering, and you've got the sin offering, all being offered together here. And the priests shall noof them, shall wave them besides the lechem of the first fruits. So they brought their first fruits and they made it into loaves of bread. Maybe that's a good thing to do. Maybe when we offer our first fruits, we can go out and buy the ingredients to make 2 loaves of bread, and we can go and give them to some people who are poor. It's an idea. We can do these things. So that's how we present them. The first fruits is a wave offering in the presence of Yehovah. Besides the 2 lambs, they are set apart to Yehovah for the priest. And on the same day you shall proclaim a set apart gathering. You do for yourselves no servile work. No work of any kind you do not do. A chukah forever in your dwellings throughout your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your land, do not completely reap the corners of your field when you reap. And do not gather any gleaning from your harvest. Leave them for the poor, for the stranger. I am Yehovah your Elohim. Another thing that it's very easy to despise his word in. Do you take all of your harvest for yourself? Is that what you do? You give your tithe or give whatever that needs to be done, but do you leave any of it for the poor and for the stranger? I suggested last year that a good way of doing this would be, if you go into a shop, if you spend cash, every time you get change, have that as the gleanings of your harvest and save that up and then offer it to Yehovah. It's actually very easy for us to do this sort of thing. We just need to think about it, and for it to be important enough for us to do it, to actually start doing these things. Yehovah spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel saying, in the 7th Chodesh, on the first day of the Chodesh, you have a Shabbaton, a rest, a remembrance of blowing of trumpets, a set apart gathering, a Kodesh Mikra. So we see this word Shabbat when it's used, or Shabbaton, and it means you shall do no work. Any work of any kind you do not do, and you shall draw near with an offering made by fire to Yehovah. So another atoning offering being spoken of here. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe saying, on the 10th day of the 7th Chodesh is the day of atonement, of atonements. It shall be a Kodesh Mikra for you, and you shall afflict your souls and draw near with an offering made by fire to Yehovah. So we saw this a couple of weeks ago. This is the day when you've got the clean room, the cleanest place on all of the earth, but it still needs to be prepared in a certain way for Yehovah to continue to be able to exist there. On this day, it gives us the command to afflict our souls. And we all know what this means. We've been through this 3 or 4 times. But some people have never done the Day of Atonement. What afflicting your souls means is basically make it a little bit tough on yourself, or make it very tough on yourself. Make it so that you are not having a great time. The way that they did this in scripture in a couple of places is they would fast. YHVH actually refers to Yom Kippur as the day of your fast. So you fast, you don't eat any food. He says, if you turn your foot from doing pleasure, your own pleasure, on my Shabbat, that he is honored by that. So that's what we do on Yom Kippur. We don't do anything that is pleasurable for ourselves. I read scripture, which I find to be pleasurable, because he says to take delight in him on that day. So read scripture. Don't eat any food. Don't make yourself comfortable. There are many different ways that we can do these things. Just make sure that you're afflicted, whatever it is for you personally. Ashley can't fast. She did this year and it didn't turn out well. She got very ill. But if you can't fast, do something else. Cut something else out of your day. Just make it that little bit difficult. It's all just about how you're responding to his word. When he says to afflict your souls, do you take that seriously? Do you not? Are you just looking for the easy way to do it, or just fast all day? Charlie doesn't drink tea. Charlie takes great pleasure from drinking tea. He doesn't drink tea on Yom Kippur, because why would you? These things are quite simple for us to do, but they're also quite simple for us to despise in our own ways. You do no work on that same day, for it is the day of atonement, to make atonement for you in the presence of YHVH your Elohim. For any soul who is not afflicted on that same day, he shall be cut off from his people. Any soul who does any work on that same day, that soul I shall destroy from the midst of his people. You do no work forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. It is a Shabbaton to you. You shall afflict your souls. On the 9th day of the Chodesh at evening, from evening to evening, you observe your Shabbat. So again, we say it here, don't we? Okay, starting at the 9th day in the evening, what starts then? The 10th day. The 10th day is from evening to evening. How could any of the other days be any different? And YHVH spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, on the 15th day of the 7th Chodesh is the festival of booths for 7 days to YHVH. On the first day is a Kodesh Mikra. You do no servile work. For 7 days you shall draw near with an offering made by fire to YHVH. On the 8th day there shall be a set-apart gathering for you, and you shall draw near with an offering made by fire to YHVH. It's a closing festival. You do no servile work. Any work of any kind you do not do. Exactly the same pattern that we have with Shmini, the 8th day. 7 days atonement is made. On the 8th day, atonement is also made, but it's this set-apart gathering. It's exactly the same pattern. On the 15th day of the 7th Chodesh, when you gather in the fruit of your land, observe the festival of YHVH for 7 days. On the first day is a rest. On the 8th day is a rest, the Shabbaton. So what we've had so far since the 7th Chodesh began, we've got the Feast of Trumpets. And we've all done the Feast of Trumpets. But for people online, what we do is it's a Kodesh Mikra. So we all gather together. And then we all go and we blow trumpets. It's pretty simple. All of these commands are pretty simple. But it's yet another example of one that's pretty easy to despise as well if you want to. It's like, oh yeah, it's the day that we're supposed to all get together and blow trumpets. So that doesn't sound very important. I'll not be doing that. Then we've got Yom Kippur to afflict our souls. But then we get what the year has been coming to the culmination of. Now we've got Sukkot. And Sukkot, the way that we do it, is we all meet together, and we go somewhere, and we camp. And you'll see why. Okay, the first day is a Shabbaton, the 8th day is a Shabbaton. You shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of good trees, branches of palm trees, twigs of leafy trees, and willows of the stream, and you shall rejoice in the presence of YHVH, your Elohim, for 7 days. And for a good while I wondered, what does it mean? You take these branches and you rejoice before YHVH. Are you meant to do a dance with the branches? So some people interpret it. Nehemiah 8:13-18 shows us how we should be doing it. It says, on the second day, the heads of the fathers' houses of all the people, with the priests and Levites, were gathered to Ezra the scribe in order to study the words of the Torah. And they found written in the Torah, which Yehovah had commanded by Moshe, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the festival of the 7th Chodesh, and that they should announce and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, go out to the mountain and bring olive branches, branches of oil trees, and myrtle branches and palm branches and branches of leafy trees to make booths, as it is written. So what were they doing that for? They were using it to make booths, and that is how they would rejoice before Yehovah. They were to do this. They were to eat of their tithe. They were to have a good time. They made booths and rejoiced before Yehovah. So the people went out and brought them, made themselves booths, each one on the roof of his house and in their courtyards, and in the courtyards of the house of Elohim, and in the open space of the water gate, and in the open space of the gate of Ephraim. So there's 2 days that were commanded to meet together, the 1st and the 8th. They built tabernacles at home. What we do is we go somewhere and we camp for all 8 days, because why not? We're all meeting together. But if people are isolated, and I hear from many people who are isolated, don't worry about making your tabernacle on the roof of your house, in your courtyard, wherever you've got to make your tabernacle. Don't worry about it. But if you can, get to a gathering, because that's what you're to be doing on the 1st and the 8th day. But don't give yourself a hard time if you're isolated and there's no one to gather with. Doing this honors Yehovah, and that's how they did it. Here we've got in the Antiquities of the Jews, book 3, chapter 10. It says, the law enjoins us to pitch tabernacles in every one of our houses so that we preserve ourselves from the cold of that time of year. That we should carry in our hands a branch of myrtle and willow and a bough of the palm tree with the addition of the pomme citron. So it doesn't seem like they were doing it exactly as they used to do it. They were carrying these things. It doesn't say that they were making them. But what's interesting to me is that they were doing this in the time of Josephus, because of how Nehemiah continues. It says the entire assembly of those who had come back from the captivity made booths and sat under the booths. For since the days of Yeshua, son of Nun, until that day, the children of Israel had not done so, and there was very great rejoicing. That is just astounding. From the days of Joshua, okay, Yehoshua, son of Nun, was shortened to Yeshua later in the scriptures. They hadn't done so. No one had done the Feast of Tabernacles. It's bizarre, but in a way, it's exactly what you see now. People are so quick to not do the Feast of Tabernacles because it seems like a bit of an inconvenience to them. And again, it's just another example of a part of Leviticus 23 that it's so easy for us to despise. If there's anything that you take away, people who've been doing the Torah for longer than needing to know these instructions, take away from it that to despise his word is easy to do. And although you might think you're doing the feasts, maybe you're not being careful to do them exactly as he's asked. Day by day, from the first day until the last day, he read from the book of the Torah of Elohim. And they performed this festival 7 days. And on the 8th day, there was an assembly according to the Mishpat. Because this is a command in the Torah that on the 7th year, they were supposed to do it every year, and on the 7th one, they would read the entire book of the Torah. So again, for people who have been following the Torah for a little while, maybe it'd be a good idea once a coat to get the Torah out and read through it at least once every 7 years. Again, they didn't have their own copy of the Torah. So coming to these things, coming to Sukkot and gathering with people, they would have their one opportunity in 7 years to hear all of the Torah. These are the appointed times of Yehovah which you proclaim as Kodesh Mikra, to draw near with an offering made by fire to Yehovah, an olah and a mincha, sacrifice and drink offerings is commanded for every day. Besides the Shabbatot of Yehovah, besides your gifts and besides your vows and besides all your voluntary offerings which you give to Yehovah. As well as all of this, there were all the other offerings required to make atonement. Atonement was not made just on the Day of Atonement. And you shall observe it as a festival to Yehovah for 7 days in the year, a chukah forever in your generations. Observe it in the 7th Chodesh. Dwell in booths for 7 days. all who are native Israelites dwell in booths, so that your generations know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out the land of Mitzrayim. I am Yehovah your Elohim. And here we get to the final part that people find it easy to despise the word of Yehovah. They feel like they've got a justification in doing it. And they say, I wasn't born in Israel. Oh, okay, you weren't born in Israel. Do you not have to keep the Feast of Tabernacles? Well, considering that we are reborn according to the word of Elohim, and that makes us then a citizen of Israel, it depends how you're quantifying that. And what was the purpose of this? What does he say? If you're a native-born Israelite, you do these things. Well, if you had a stranger that was dwelling in your midst that was nothing to do with Israel, would you make him also? As you say, no, you've got to make yourself a booth. You've got to live in your... No, if you're going to live here, get yourself some myrtle branches, make yourself a booth. That's not how it's going to work, is it? The whole purpose is that your generations know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths. That's why we do it, so that we remember when they came out. All of the feasts remind us of redemption. The Passover, when we relate what happened in Exodus 12. Okay, unleavened bread, when they didn't have leavened bread to eat. All of the feasts teach us about this redemption, and this one is too as well. And like I was saying before, when you come face to face with, if I do this to somebody, I'm going to have it done to me, and it makes it that much more real for you. And it's about how you experience these things. It's exactly the same with this. Actually going and dwelling in booths for 8 days gives you a completely different perspective on what actually happened when he brought out the children of Israel. The Torah is amazing, and it's designed for things beyond our comprehension. Thus did Moshe speak of the Modeh of Yehovah to the children of Israel. So, final slide. For anybody who is new to doing this, this is how it works, and this is how it's going to work on this calendar. We're past the spring feasts already. We're into the time of the counting of 7 Sabbaths, or 50 days, and that's going to culminate on Shavuot. This is when Passover was this year. This is an effort to demonstrate the evening of the 24th to the evening of the 25th. Then, the next day, for 7 days, you eat unleavened bread. Pretty simple. Get yourself some unleavened bread and you eat it. On the first day and on the 7th day are rests. Any work of any kind, you do not do. The day after the Sabbath is first fruits. And we saw how we keep first fruits. We offer the first fruits of our harvest to Yehovah. Then from first fruits, it said, count 7 completed Sabbath, 7 Tamim Sabbaths. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pretty easy to do. You count the days as well. And when you come to the 50th day, here it is. It's Shavuot. And we present the first fruits of our harvest to Yehovah. Again, the harvest that we've had in the meantime. Then we go to the 7th Chodesh. First day of the Chodesh is the day of trumpets. Meet together with some people. If you've got people around, go and blow some trumpets somewhere. Very simple to do. On the 10th day of that Chodesh is Yom Kippur. You afflict your souls. You make it tough on yourself for the day. Actually, in my experience of the day, it teaches you to appreciate the things that you've got from Yehovah. Something that it achieved for me. But you afflict your souls anyway, and you do no work on that day. Then Sukkot starts from the 15th day of that Chodesh. First day and the 8th day are rests, and you don't do any work. So if you want to know the days you don't do any work, first day of unleavened bread, last day of unleavened bread. You've got all the Shabbats in between, you obviously don't work on. Shavuot, you don't do any work either. This day, it's a rest, you don't do any work. This day, you don't do any work. This day and this day, you don't do any work. It's so simple to do, and it's so simple to despise. And that seems to be, to me, the way that the word of Elohim works. That there are certain things in it which make it so clear what you're supposed to do. And there are certain things in it that if it's in your heart to not do those things and not be obedient, it's easy to point to that and say, what about this and what about that? And Yehovah will just let you go your own way. You'll end up where you will. But praise Yehovah that he's given us these things. He's invited us to join them and to share them with him. Shall we pray? Father, I thank you for your appointed times. Thank you that you've set those times apart in creation, and that you've chosen to invite us to take part in them with you, and to draw close to you and to find out who you are, and that you would have chosen us to do these things with you, and that you've chosen us and brought us together, and we get to meet and talk about you and find out more about what's pleasing to you, and walk in those things and be more blessed as a result of them. I thank you for everything you do in our lives, and just the provision that you bring for us. That we have the Shabbat every week is another set apart time, which is just another time to enjoy with each other and to enjoy with you. And you're so amazing. The things that you've given us are so amazing, and the creation is so amazing. Thank you, Father. Thank you that we have instructions as to how to be righteous, and we know what right and wrong is. There's no debates, and there's no confusion, and you make things clear to us. Thank you, Father, for everything you do for us. Amen.